On the cool side, the low cloud covering the hills in the east as well, and it's going to stick around through much of the afternoon. But in the west, brighter skies develop and it's largely dry, with temperatures reaching the high teens in some of the favoured spots. Now, we keep that east-west split going into Friday night, and that's really how we start the weekend. A lot of low cloud in the east, clearer spells towards the north and the west, and plenty of sunshine developing throughout Saturday. Saturday's a mainly dry day, but with that low cloud in the east, there will be some patchy drizzle. A band of rain into the north on Sunday.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
A very warm welcome to GB News Live. Here with me, Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you a little earlier this Thursday lunchtime, brace yourselves because, yes, the Bank of England about to release its decision on interest rates. The base rate expected to be raised yet again, the 12th time, indeed, perhaps. The highest level then since 2008 will be reached. Also, we're hearing the bank's assessment today as to where the economy will be heading and whether, indeed, there may have to be more rate rises to come, all part of the battle to tame inflation. But, of course, that is inflicting more pain on households across the country. Well, let's cross now to the Bank of England and bring in our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, who is there for us. Liam, of course, we've been discussing here on GB News in these past weeks the fact that inflation remaining stubbornly high, still in double digits. The bank got very little option, really, but to carry on pressing the pedal.
I think you're right, Mark. Unfortunately, if you're a hard-pressed mortgage holder, you've got other personal loans linked to variable interest rates. Inflation in March, it did surprisingly stay in double digits, 10.1%. And that means that the 9 members of the Monetary Policy Committee sitting in the Bank of England behind me there, some of them may disagree, but I think on balance they will vote to raise interest rates, as you say, for the 12th time in a row. Interest rates will have gone up all the way from just 0.1% emergency lockdown levels at the end of 2021, all the way up to 4.25% now, and up, I suggest, in the next few minutes to 4.5%. Average variable mortgage rates, of course, will go up, and other personal loans, as I've said. Good news for savers, though. If you're saving, if you're getting interest on your savings, and sometimes the banks pass on those interest rate rises, don't they? Sometimes they don't. That rate of interest you're getting is still well below the rate of inflation. So it's still, as we say in economics, negative in real terms. But I think the real issue today, Mark, when this decision is made, is what the Bank of England governor says in the press conference afterwards. And after I report what the Bank of England has done in just a few minutes' time, I'll be scuttling into that building behind and sitting in a press conference with Andrew Bailey. We all want to know his view, the Monetary Policy Committee's view, of where interest rates are going after this. Because as you say, this 0.25% interest rate rise is pretty much nailed on, as they say in financial markets. It's going to happen. Financial markets are looking at 4.75, even 5% peak. But I suggest to you, Mark, as I've been saying for quite a few weeks in our discussions here on GB News, if this April inflation number, which comes out next week, if it's seriously in single digits, I actually think it could begin with an 8. It could be 8 point something. Then speculation will grow that this interest rate rise, which we're about to get, unless I'm very much mistaken, will be the last one.
As you say, we also get this assessment from the bank as to where the economy is going. Now, there is another group of experts, the National Institute of Economic Social Research, saying, look, we forecasting inflation will remain persistently higher than expected. So ending the year 5.4%, whereas the Office for Budget Responsibility was saying like 2.9%. There are lots of things pushing and pulling in the economy. And, of course, we get, I think, the growth figures this Friday to actually give us an indication as to where it's going.
I think stubborn is very much the word to use to describe UK inflation. What a contrast from the word transitory, which is exactly what the Bank of England governor, in a ludicrous outburst, was saying as late as November 2021, when inflation was already approaching a 30-year high, long before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, by the way. There's lots of reasons why UK inflation is stubbornly high. In the Eurozone, inflation is now 6.9%. In the States, it's just below 5%. Energy in America is much, much cheaper because they've got shale, oil and gas. Energy in the Eurozone and across most of Western Europe is cheaper because they spend a lot more state money subsidising energy prices. So stubbornly high energy prices here in the UK. We did lots and lots of quantitative easing, central bank money printing. We did more quantitative easing in just 2 years of lockdown than we did in the previous 10 years, which followed the global financial crisis in 2018. But for me, the real reason that food price inflation staying high, that's another big reason inflation is so stubbornly elevated. But the ultimate culprit of high inflation in this country is, for me, energy prices. Wholesale energy prices are now way below where they were last summer. They're lower than they were before the war in Ukraine, and yet households are still paying huge bills for their energy, as are companies. All that feeds through into inflation and the cost of living crisis.
Yeah, and of course, let's just remind everyone that we've got a Bank of England target of 2% for inflation. Even if they keep pressing the pedal, they're unlikely to achieve that by the end of the year, perhaps.
There's no way inflation. I'm just looking at my phone because I'm waiting for this decision
official,
to be made,
so
Mark.
it's come through.
There you go.
Just to touch on that. Yeah, sorry, Liam, carry on.
4.5%, as we expected. Interest rates now the highest since 2008. I think the technical wizards at GB News have already put those numbers into a graphic which we can look at. And if you look at this graphic, you can see that during the years before lockdown, interest rates were already historically pretty low, less than 1%. That was a hangover from the global financial crisis, of course, back in 2008-9. They went down to just 1/4% during those years of lockdown. But look at that escalator increase to the right of that graph. 12 successive interest rate rises in little more than a year. Well, from December 2021 to May 2023, 12 in a row from 0.1% to 4.25%. That's why the housing market is very, very shaky. That's why financial markets are shaky, of course, because a lot of banks we've seen in America, but also here in Europe and the UK, are suffering with those higher interest rates because they bought lots of government bonds, the value of which falls when interest rates rise. So this is a very difficult financial situation, and there will now be pushback from financial markets. They will be saying to the Bank of England, look, do you really need to raise rates anymore? You're going to end up crashing financial markets. You're going to end up killing the UK's fragile recovery, because monetary policy, interest rate rises, is a very blunt instrument, Mark. It's basically trying to make households and firms poorer, make it more expensive for them to borrow, reining in their horns, if you like, in order to crush demand in the economy and keep a lid on price rises. It's a very blunt instrument, particularly when so many of the price rises are for supply side reasons, ongoing supply chain issues, and many people will say profiteering from some of the food retailers, the energy companies. They will, of course, deny that, but I think a lot of quite respected economists are now eyeing different parts of the economy, wondering why inflation here in the UK remains so stubbornly high.
And just looking at this graphic again, I mean, a lot of people have been questioning the approach. We've had what they call an incremental approach of these 1/4 point or 1/4% rises coming in on a regular basis. I mean, there's some people saying, why didn't they just try and shock the economy by going for a big 1% rise to see if that would choke off inflation? Would that have worked?
I think it would, yes, Mark. I've been arguing that for several years now, that the Bank of England should have been raising rates much faster, much earlier. In the US, that's what they did, and US inflation is now down below 5%, though that's partly linked to cheaper energy prices in America, as I've been saying. Look, it doesn't surprise any GB News viewers or listeners or anyone in the media. I've been very critical of the Bank of England. I think there's far too much groupthink on the Monetary Policy Committee. There aren't the kind of intellectual outliers who have the credibility and the experience and the financial markets smarts to argue against the conventional wisdom. The Bank of England, in my view, has been, it was myopic about inflationary dangers in 2020 and 2021, which many of us were warning about. When it finally accepted it needed to make a move on interest rates, rather than bold, decisive, broad brush actions to convince the markets and people in the economy that they were going to squeeze inflation out of the system, we've had grudging, slow, incremental interest rate rises. And that's why, in my view, we'll never know the counterfactual, but in my view, that's why interest rates in the UK have had to go up further than they otherwise would have had.
Well, Leo, a bit of thinking from inside the Monetary Policy Committee coming through now. Let's just update people. The fact that 7 members of the committee voted to raise to 4.5% from 4.25%. The remaining 2 members wanted to keep rates unchanged, saying inflation already expected to fall considerably this year without the need to raise the rate again, saying a lot of the impact of rising rates had not yet come through into the economy. The bank itself estimating around 1/3 of the impact of rates increases have been passed through. So there is still uncertainty on that committee. I mean, only 2 of them, but seemingly, they're still not certain as to whether this is too much.
Look, economics is not a science, Mark. It's a rather grubby and deeply politicised art. Take it from me. There are always going to be differences of opinion. That's what economics is about. No one can predict the future, and if they say they can, then they're not being truthful. It's good that there are variations in views on the Monetary Policy Committee. And even though I've been quite, what we say, hawkish on inflation, looking for early interest rate rises, I actually wrote a column a month ago saying that I don't think the Bank of England should raise interest rates anymore, because we've already had 11, now 12 interest rate rises. They take months and months to feed through the system. The famous monetary economist Milton Friedman always said, he won the Nobel Prize for it, that monetary policy works with long and variable lags. Given that inflation is likely to fall sharply in the coming months, it may be that this latest interest rate decision looks, as if the Bank of England has now overshot in the other direction. But look, no one's saying monetary policy is easy. The people in the building behind me do have a tough job. I think there should be a broader range of opinions on the Monetary Policy Committee, and I've said that for a long time. And also, no one is saying that these interest rate rises are easy at all. If you've got a mortgage, if you're a business with debt, this will slow the economy down. And the danger is if the Bank of England does yet another interest rate rise in the months to come, then they will crush the UK's fragile economic recovery.
Indeed. Liam, thank you for that. But let's just take everyone through a bit more of the bank's thinking. It's just released some of its thinking in terms of the report, with the increase in the cost of living expected to fall slower than previously thought, says the bank, a warning effectively. And the government's promise to halve inflation by the end of the year narrowly on track. That's the phrase they've used. Now, the bank says it expects the consumer price index, that's the inflation figure effectively, to be at 5.1% by the end of this year. And the government, of course, wanted the target of bringing inflation below 5.35%. That was the promise from Rishi Sunak. So it might just achieve that. But it is this monthly increase in food prices, says the bank, that has slowed things down. On the other aspect, though, economists at the bank think that there will be a better position in terms of growth in the economy. The bank saying now it expects GDP, growth domestic product, or the growth in the economy, at 2.25%, higher at the end of its three-year forecast than it said in February. Indeed, the largest upgrade since 1997, when the committee was actually formed. So this is quite significant. They think, actually, that growth in the economy is really going to pick up, something that Liam has been talking about in terms of the green shoots of the economy. However, let's also reflect that the Citizens Advice Bureau has said that for many people, life is getting worse, not better, particularly, of course, for many families and, indeed, many industries, particularly the hospitality industry. Well, let's bring in our East Midlands reporter now, Will Hollis, who's at the Red Lion pub in Lincolnshire. And clearly we've heard, Will, how they've been trying to absorb as many costs as possible in these recent months, but yet more pressure on them.
Yes, good afternoon from the Bank of England, where those decisions about the bank rate are made, to a local pub here in Lincolnshire where those decisions are talked about. We were expecting to hear that it was going to be 4.5%, the interest rate, the bank rate. I'm joined by Simon Fast. Simon, you're the business owner of the Red Lion here in Caythorpe, which is near Grantham. We expected it and we've heard it. What's your reaction to the interest rate going up by 0.25%?
Well, I think it just reflects the further reduction in people's leisure spend. So therefore that has a direct impact on our businesses.
What might happen now for you and for the customers that like to come here for a beer or for some lunch at the Red Lion?
I think what we'll see is a reduction in the average spend of people coming. I don't necessarily see what's a dry up of people coming, but they will inevitably be spending less because they've got less.
So at this period, your experience is that people are still coming to places like this, but they're just spending less money. Just reflect on the last month, last year or so, because this is the 12th bank rate rise that the Bank of England has put on for interest rates.
Well, the last 12 months have been tough. It's not just the interest rates going up, which reduces leisure spend. It's the cost of all the products going up at the same time. So food's gone up in excess of 10%.
What are the sort of things that you're noticing as a pub where people like to come, particularly for Sunday lunches or a pint?
Well, look, we had to put 35p on the price of a pint a couple of months ago because that was a direct reflection of the breweries passing their costs on to us. And Sunday lunch, again, because we buy local, with the energy increases as well, our local suppliers have put their prices up. So a typical Sunday lunch in the last year has gone from 15 to about 18.50.
What are the conversations you're hearing from this community? We're quite close to Grantham. This area is traditionally quite wealthy. It's got a little bit of disposable income. Are people still feeling the effects of this, even though this is a place where people are a little bit fortunate?
Yeah, I mean, I think anywhere along from Grantham, the cliff-top villages, we are a bit more fortunate. We are rural Lincolnshire. However, there are still people who have got high mortgages, and they're just getting higher and higher, as well as energy and as well as cost of living. So I think what I'm hearing is that people have just got a little bit less in their pocket.
Mortgages and loans seem to be the thing that are really hit during this period of higher interest rates. We've been reflecting on where we've come from, but where do you think we're looking at in the next year? We've got a backdrop of things like the pandemic, we've got the war in Ukraine and high inflation on food. One of the reasons is because of that war, as well as high energy costs. Where do you see your industry, hospitality, being in a year's time when we've just had another interest rate rise?
Well, look, I think those pubs and restaurants that are food-led will weather the storm. And we've got to remain positive, else it's no good for anybody. We've got to be economic with what we offer so people can afford it. But those that are in wet-led, I think are going to find it really tough.
And then just overall, do you think this is the right decision to raise rates again? We just had our economics editor saying that this, in his view, wasn't what they should have done. They should have kept it as what it is, or at least not raise it. From your perspective as a local man, a man who knows the trade, is raising the interest rates now the right thing to do to try and bring down that soaring inflation that is particularly driven by food at 19%?
I think it's a balance, to be honest. You can call it one way or the other, but it's still bad news all around, isn't it? Because, OK, look, if it does curve that inflation and brings it down, overall inflation down below 10%, great, because that will balance the books a little bit. However, it's still another knock for people. It's still another 30 quid on somebody's mortgage, potentially.
Of course. The pub has just opened. They're going to be starting to serve food soon, some lunch. So there's going to be people in here. We'll find out how locals are reacting to the Bank of England raising interest rates to 4.5%, Mark.
Yes, either drowning their sorrows or celebrating perhaps if they've got a saving account. Will, down in the red line there in Lincolnshire, thank you for that. Back to you a little later. But let's just update you, of course, with this breaking news that the base rate has gone up. Just to remind you, the figure 4.5%, now the highest since 2008, a 0.25% increase. 7 of the 9 members of the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee voting to increase, but 2 wanted it to stay as it was, saying inflation was already expected to fall considerably this year. In terms of the bank itself, it expects inflation by the end of this year to be at 5.1%, which would mean that the government just about managed to hit its target to cut inflation in half, as it said, by the end of the year to below 5.35%. Well, let's cross to Downing Street now and speak to our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. And Tom, maybe another fillip for the government, with the bank indicating it believes that growth in the economy will be much higher at the end of this 3-year forecast period than it said back in February. A little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel.
A little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel there, but of course this 5.1% figure of expected inflation by the year end is more than twice what the Office for Budget Responsibility expected inflation to get down to at the end of this year. These 4 in the wrong direction. And indeed, the Prime Minister's spokesman said just moments ago to a lobby briefing of journalists in the building behind me that the government, that we shouldn't expect that the government is on a guide path to meet this target, that there is no glide path to meet this target, that everything within government has to be focused upon meeting this target because things won't naturally get there by themselves. This is a bit of a wake-up call, I think, to people in government, that there is still more to be done to get inflation down. Of course, we've seen for the last few months it stubbornly remain in double digits, and this is a concern for many people in government. Of course, this is one of Rishi Sunak's top 5 priorities as Prime Minister, and we're seeing that the perhaps expectation that this inflation would fall really quite quickly perhaps isn't moving as fast as they would like.
And, of course, a political price to pay, perhaps. I think Rachel Reeves for Labour has done her number crunching, estimating that people have been paying an extra £1.05 billion in higher mortgage payments since that disastrous mini-budget.
Yes, this is a repeated refrain from the Labour Party. We heard it a lot around the time of the local elections, pinning all of the blame of interest rate rises on that mini budget. Of course, if we're going to take a rational look at it, there have been interest rate rises in other countries as well. We have seen European banks raise their interest rates. We've seen the Federal Reserve in the US raise their interest rates. So it can't all be blamed on what happened in this country in October last year. However, clearly there has been an effect, and it happened at the same time. The other big issue, of course, is that people are so over-leveraged on these mortgages, that there is so much more borrowed than in previous decades, that even relatively small interest rate rises now have a much bigger effect on the wider economy than much larger interest rate rises did, for example, in the early 1990s.
Yeah, so in cash terms, really biting. I mean, as I think the Citizens Advice Bureau have reflected, it's had its bleakest start to the year, seeing 9,600 people a day from June, January and April. For many, life is getting worse, not better. And clearly the government will be looking at this as it heads towards a general election, you know, wondering when that sort of oil tanker of the economy can be turned round.
And frankly, can it be turned around fast enough? This is the big question that, in fact, we'll be hearing probably from opposition parties from now until that next election. Do you feel better off now than you did 5 years ago? It's the Ronald Reagan question from the 1980s. He used it to great effect in becoming president and maintaining that position. And we've started to hear it from Labour Party MPs now. Do you feel better off than you did 4 or 5 years ago? For many people in this country, the answer's no.
Tom, in Downing Street, outside number 11, thank you very much indeed for that. More political reaction to come, of course. Also, more to come from the housing market. What's it going to do, as well as pushing those mortgage rates up? We'll be speaking to an estate agent and get some helpful cost of living tips. Can't wait for that, can you? Back with you in a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen. Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends were like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us 4, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Let's update you on this breaking news from the Bank of England. It's pushed the base rate up yet again to 4.5%. That's the highest figure since 2008, a 0.25% rise, although we're being told 2 members of the Monetary Policy Committee actually voted to keep rates on hold, saying that the full effect of previous rate rises is not fed through as yet, but already plenty of reaction coming through. Rachel Reeves, Labour's Shadow Chancellor, saying that people will be racked with anxiety after confirmation of rates going up again. The Prime Minister, she said, must admit responsibility for a Tory mortgage penalty, leaving so many worse off. Rachel Reeves again calling for what she called was a proper windfall tax on oil and gas to ease the cost of living. The CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, Deputy Chief Economist Anna Leach saying the bank was rightly concerned that higher inflation could become entrenched, saying that ongoing strength in wage growth and better than expected economic activity could lead to higher inflation becoming entrenched. Anna Leach, the CBI's chief economist, saying the future path for interest rates as yet uncertain. Credit costs so far and turbulence could disrupt activity. Now, just to update you on what the bank itself is saying, it's expecting now inflation by the end of this year to be at 5.4%, whereas the Office of Budget Responsibility, the government's official statistical watchdog, if you like, was talking about 2.9%, although it still means that the government will just sneak in its promise to halve inflation by the end of the year. What's he going to do for the housing market? Well, let's join our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's in Godalming in Surrey at an estate agent's there. And, of course, Paul, I think the Royal Chartered Institute of Surveyors had been indicating that a lot of housing activity was sort of flatlining, I think was the phrase they'd used.
Yeah, that's what we're hearing, and some are forecasting house prices to fall. The rough back of a fag packet calculation that Martin Lewis, who knows a thing or two about money, says is that for every 1% increase in the interest rate on your mortgage, you can add another £50 a month on borrowing of £100,000. So that's an extra £100 a month if you're borrowing £200,000. Of course, this is a 0.25% increase in the base rate, not a 1%. So you do the maths on that one. Remember, not everyone is on a standard or variable mortgage. About 1 million people are, so they'll see on a variable, or tracker mortgage. So they're going to see their mortgage interest payments go up straight away. But even those that are on fixed deals, we spoke to one woman earlier. We said, when are you refixing your mortgage? She says, this August. So we're going to hunt around. And of course, we're going to see, when we did fix ours previously, it was around about 2%. Now we're looking at 6% interest rate on our mortgage. So our repayments are going to go up. But let's find out how it's affecting the housing market. We can speak to Adam Boshoff, who's sales manager at Seymour's in Godalming. Adam, thanks for speaking to us. First of all, how are these interest rate rises affecting the mortgage market, particularly in this part of the world?
I think it ultimately just goes down to their budgeting. They would have, at the moment, it comes as no surprise that the interest rate today has gone up. It has been going up, as we all know, for a little while. People have just adjusted their budgeting and are forecasting that there'll probably be another one, and are quite settled with it now. I think the uncertainty that was in the market at the start of the year has levelled out a little bit. So I don't think it has big an impact.
So you'd agree with that assessment that our presenter Mark was just saying, that the market appears to be flat at the moment?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say we've had a big spike over the last few years. We're probably levelling back down again, and that certainty is what the markets need. They just want some form of stability. I don't think this is welcomed as an interest rate, but ultimately it is what it is, and I think the public are now more aware of it, and I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah, and are we seeing growth in house prices, or are they falling? Or
I wouldn't say it's supply and demand. Certainly within our lovely market town, it's supply and demand. In certain price bands, we're getting high demand for property prices, and some of them still going in excess, and then others maybe not quite at that level. So I think that'll be a spring summer market, which anywhere in the country is going to experience. We may only see the impacts later in the year.
And I know you deal with buying and selling houses, but of course there is the lettings market as well, which is under huge pressure at the moment, and this is going to have knock-on effects for that. Those landlords that have buy-to-let mortgages.
Yeah, it will be, and I think that is where there's already been an impact over the last few months and years now, and I think they will be looking at this, like you were just saying. If someone's coming out of a particular rate and it's a buy-to-let, this is going to be an impact. They will pass it on to the tenant, which is not going to be, fortunate for them. I do feel for tenants at the moment. I think if these prices continue to go up, I just don't know the answer to how they're going to resolve it.
Buy more houses. Build more houses.
Yeah, so not around here. That's the catch. We're a nice green belt. It's where do you find them, and how quickly will that solve it?
Yeah, exactly. Adam, thanks for speaking to us. Really appreciate it. It's Adam Boshoff there from Seymour's giving us a kind of a rough overview of how the housing market looks in this part of the world. But it is difficult one, not just for those that are buying and selling houses, those that want to get on the property ladder, but also, of course, those that rent properties as well, because we know that there's a big problem with landlords leaving the market after that relief on their mortgage payments was taken away by the government. So the incentive to be in the market for landlords just isn't there at the moment. That's what we're hearing from a lot of people.
Indeed, and of course that means fewer properties, and that pushes the rental costs up, so people are paying more even if they're renting. Paul, thank you for the lovely high street there in Godalming, even though perhaps not looking entirely rosy. Just to update you, Knight Frank, which is one of the big chain estate agents, a sort of higher level, posher end of the market, their finance expert is saying he's not expecting any major moves to mortgage rates, as several large lenders have already put up prices in the 2 weeks before today's announcement. So there's a little bit of tempering there of the doom and gloom, indicating perhaps a lot of mortgage lenders have maybe put their prices up already. Just to update you on the bigger picture, the pound, we're being told, little difference. Sterling at 126 to the dollar, 115 to the euro. So basically, again, pricing in this mortgage or the interest rate rise, so little panic on the money markets. But of course, it does mean that the cost of living crisis is continuing to bite in terms of the Citizens Advice Bureau saying many more people have been coming to their doors in the first 3 months of the year. So what will be the problems that people will be facing now? Let's speak now to the founder of the Real Mums Club, Chrissy Powell, who can join us. Chrissy, thanks for your time. And I guess a lot of people would have tried to tighten their belt as much as they can already and found the money-saving tips that they can. I mean, where do they go from here?
Exactly. As a busy mum of two myself, soon to be 3, I found, along with the interest rates and also looking at the economy itself and the gas and electric bills, I think one of the biggest flaws that we're facing at the moment is food. It's absolutely astronomical. It's rising weekly. And so I've just been making a few changes at home in order to claw some money back and also reduce that cost.
And of course, I think, we're talking about 19% plus in terms of food inflation when you're just trying to feed your family. But in terms of the overall picture, I mean, are you a little bit more optimistic about what's going to happen for the rest of the year, that things might start to get a little easier? And can I ask you, how much have you got left in the kitty to cope with any further raises and increases?
I think it's not ultimately looking at what's left in the kitty. It's about trying to reduce costs now so you can prevent that in the future. And I think as a mum, I think most of us face it's the marketing. It's changing your mindset, looking at batch cooking meals rather than cooking every single night. It's looking at price per kilogram and bulk buying what you can in order to save a little bit of money in the long run. And also I found with batch cooking, you're less likely to buy the convenience items such as the takeaways, the McDonald's, because they're also increasing now. And as much as they are a necessity to have, it's an unexpected cost again, isn't it? And I think if we get into that mindset now, we're going to then prepare for the future. Because at the moment, it is a little bit uncertain. And I think food costs are going up on the week. So there will be some families, I think, will be struggling even more than others because their income cannot budget for that constant increase in price.
Yeah,
so,
and of course, suggestions perhaps that there's... Yeah, suggestions perhaps that these supermarkets themselves have been pushing prices a little higher than they should be. What about the heating situation? Have you turned your heating off now for the rest of the year?
Yeah, my heating's off. It's all about dressing gowns and buying your children an Oodie that they can pop on. Obviously, if you need to put the heating on, you need to put the heating on. But if we can try and reduce that, so in the long run, we're not faced with the incline of the cost, then that's what we're doing in our house.
But of course, many mums and dads feeling very guilty that they're not giving the kids any treats or whatever. I mean, is that something else that's had to be sacrificed? The fun element in life.
No, I disagree completely because I think you can make your treats at home for a fraction of the price, and my children haven't noticed the difference. For example, those branded supermarket marketed items that mums grab and go, you can make them at home for so much cheaper, and my children haven't felt like they've missed out in the long run. So it's just about not falling for that marketing in the supermarkets.
Yeah, and avoiding all those the sweet counter at the checkout, of course, although I think that's banned in many supermarkets now. But Chrissy, thank you very much for updating us with your situation there, and of course, good luck with managing the household budget. Plenty more reaction coming up on that interest rate rise, and looking ahead, of course, to the economy, what it's going to be doing for the rest of the year. All the experts lining up to speak to us, but lining up right now, it's Rhiannon with the latest news headlines.
Mark, thank you. It's 12:33, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Well, as we've been hearing, UK interest rates have been raised for a 12th time in a row in a further attempt by the Bank of England to tackle soaring inflation. The bank's base rate has increased by 0.25 percentage point from 4.25 to 4.5%, the highest level in 15 years. Our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, says business owners and mortgage holders will be worst affected.
Given that inflation is likely to fall sharply in the coming months, it may be that this latest interest rate decision looks, as if the Bank of England has now overshot in the other direction. But look, no one's saying monetary policy is easy. The people in the building behind me do have a tough job. I think there should be a broader range of opinions on the Monetary Policy Committee, and I've said that for a long time. And also, no one is saying that these interest rate rises are easy at all. If you've got a mortgage, if you're a business with debt, this will slow the economy down. And the danger is if the Bank of England does yet another interest rate rise in the months to come, then they will crush the UK's fragile economic recovery.
The BBC has found there were no concerns about Richard Sharp's integrity whilst he was chairman of the broadcaster. The BBC Conflicts of Interest review was commissioned following Mr Sharp's resignation from the corporation in April, after he was found to have breached the rules for public appointments. Plaid Cymru have appointed Llŷr Griffith as interim leader. It follows the resignation of Adam Price last night after a damning report into the Welsh Nationalist Party's culture. The report found the party had failed to implement a zero-tolerance approach to sexual harassment, bullying and misogyny. The appointment will be subject to ratification by the party's National Council on Saturday. TV online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2605 and €1.1537. The price of gold is £1,612.08 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 sits 7,710 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for physical investment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Just to update you a bit more reaction coming into this interest rate rise. The Liberal Democrats have called on the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to resign if he fails to meet his inflation target and to actually lower food bills. Sarah Olney, their financial spokesman, saying with mortgages now inflation at sky-high levels, Jeremy Hunt is failing at his job. He set one main goal, which is to bring down prices, yet today confirms he's nowhere near achieving that. If he doesn't meet his self-imposed inflation target and bring down bills soon, he must go. More reaction coming through, of course, as we get it. But let's reflect on events now in the USA, where making his first public appearance since a jury in New York found him guilty of sexual assault and defaming E. Jean Carroll, Donald Trump has again denied even knowing her, describing her as a, quote, whack job. Well, amongst other things, the former president also saying if he were to be re-elected, he would be inclined to pardon a large portion of those prosecuted for their part in the storming of the Capitol in January 2021, claiming he would end to the war in Ukraine within 24 hours. Well, let's get the thoughts now of what the former president had to say. Political psychologist and commentator Dr. Jan Halper-Hayes joins us now. There may be Democrats, Dr. Halper-Hayes, who believe that Trump is the whack job after that performance last night.
Well, I think that everyone that is a presenter needs to look at that as a lesson, because what she did was she went on past things. She went on J6, she went on a stolen election, and she went on the sexual assault and defamation. There are things such as the fentanyl, the border policy, inflation, foreign policy that could have been asked. So let's not call him a whack job, because actually he isn't. He's good at playing the media. He is good at fooling the media. And he is very good at getting his points across. So I would really expect GB News to not use those kind of adverbs or adjectives so that we can really present Trump as he is.
Are you seriously suggesting, however, that the host of that programme should not address the issue of the jury finding him guilty of sexual assault and the whole issue, then, of the attack on the Capitol building, bearing in mind how much weight that has in terms of a build-up to a presidential race for 2024?
You know what? This is where you guys are so off, and you need to get in touch with the public, seriously. And I don't mean to be insulting. It is true of every time I'm doing an interview that I just want to say that is old news. If you want to know about the election, Time Magazine did a 24-page report by Molly Ball about how the Democrats outsmarted the Republicans and stole the election. Yes, right. They did it very well. And Trump is right in doing it only because he got us all off of our bottoms for us to take action and to realize that we could not depend on our politicians anymore. Our government is we the people, for the people, by the people, and people have started standing up. And that is what Trump has made his supporters do. And it has made defections from the independents, the Democrat Party, and the Hispanics and the Black community.
However, there are many political analysts who say he's lost the so-called soccer mums, those suburban female floating voters who will have no truck with this approach on this civil charge that he's been found guilty of. And let's bring in the fact that John Cornyn, who is the Republican senator in Texas, says you can't win a general election with just your base. If he keeps trying to push this message to his political base, he's not going to achieve the White House.
Okay, John Cornyn is not necessarily well respected, but let's leave that out.
What, because of what he says?
All right, I wish you guys would also look at all of the polls and the articles that came out of those that are in support of him. Why do we bring up this negative without any balance to it whatsoever, Mark? And that is, you know, the
Can you explain to me then what the balance is when a jury finds him guilty of sexual assault?
Okay, Mark, it was a New York jury. He is going to appeal it, and he will win with that. E.G. Carroll is a rather colorful character. She has a cat that is named V of the woman's you-know-what. And she did a New Yorker article, and she runs twice a month tours of the most hideous men in New York. I think the positive that came out of it is just like Harvey Weinstein. I am hoping more women feel inspired to stand up and not cow down.
Okay.
But if you're going to harp on that, Mark, if you're going to harp on that, you're harping on the wrong thing.
But that's an interesting point. If other women do come forward and press charges in this run-up to the presidential race, that could finish him politically.
No, I'm not saying press charges against him. I'm saying in general to come out. Women have been absolutely afraid to speak out because they get punished when they speak out. There have already been 23 women in the past that came out. Has that hurt him? It didn't hurt him in 2016, and it's not going to help him going forward. But for us to stay focused on just that. Now, let me say one other thing about New York law, is that the judge gave the jury that they had to find something to be more true than not true. Not reasonable doubt, but more true than not true.
Yes, because it's a civil case, not a criminal case.
The law in New York is that if you hug, kiss, touch another person without their consent, that is considered sexual abuse. I'm glad you're using the term sexual assault because that is far more accurate, but they're trying to do another thing to discredit him, and it's not going to happen. People are more and more awake than you would believe, and I just wish there would be one TV station, one interview that we could talk about the counters to it.
OK, well, that we'll have to leave that for another time. But clearly, I think he put his political position very clearly on CNN last night. But Dr. Jan Halper-Hayes, thank you very much for bringing us your analysis of that town hall meeting, as it was described there in New Hampshire. Now, let's reflect that in the past few minutes, the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, has confirmed that the UK is to provide Ukraine with multiple Storm Shadow cruise missiles. This is ahead of any anticipated spring counter-offensive by the Ukrainians against Russia. Now, the missiles have a firing range, we're told, of about 155 miles, and that could allow Ukraine to fire into Russian-held eastern Ukraine, although we understand the UK has asked for assurances from Ukraine that they will not be fired into Russia itself. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak previously giving strong hints that he'd been considering sending longer-range weapons to Ukraine. Let's get the views now of former senior military intelligence officer Philip Ingram, who can join us. And Philip, we heard Zelensky, of course, appealing once more for more kit to be delivered, perhaps more armour on the ground. But in terms of the aerial warfare, this could be significant in regaining parts of eastern Ukraine.
Well, it'll be significant in shaping the battlefield for the Ukrainian counteroffensive because it now gives the Ukrainians the range to be able to attack the logistic supplies that will come across the newly repaired Kerch Bridge, to attack into the naval bases in Sevastopol and logistic bases that are dotted throughout Crimea, as well as through the occupied eastern part of Ukraine. It's something that I think the Russians will be very concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that enough will be sent to do both jobs? And which, does Zelensky have to go for first, trying to regain eastern Ukraine or Crimea with, of course, its ports into the seaways?
Well, Crimea is sort of the logistic base for the Russian troops inside parts of eastern Ukraine. So what Zelensky will want to do is to isolate Crimea from the rest of Russia and isolate Crimea from being able to influence any counterattack into the eastern part of Ukraine. That's where I think the ground offensive will come into.
OK, just looking at what the Russians could do, I mean, they've already started growling at this. And, of course, they are saying that eastern Ukraine now is already Russian territory in their view. They've annexed it. Could this up the ante on the bigger picture?
It'll certainly up the ante, but the only Russian response will be to fire more of their missiles at Ukraine and to increase the rhetoric that's coming out. I don't think they've got much else that they can do.
Now, what will this Storm Shadow do? Because we've talked much in the recent weeks and months about the drones and other missiles being fired. But this is quite a sophisticated weapon that could be programmed, I guess, to actually track across the territories and the landscape to hit something pretty specific.
Yeah, it's an air-launched cruise missile and will be launched and can be launched from some of the aircraft that the Ukrainians have got. That integration will almost certainly have been done already. Range in excess of 250 kilometres. It's got a warhead of approximately 450 kilograms. The British versions of it, and there are a number of countries around the world operate this, so there are good stocks of them around. The British version of it has got a bunker-busting warhead on it, so that it can blow its way into a bunker and then destroy anything that's in there. So it's guided by itself. So once it's launched, it's already pre-programmed on its target. It will map the terrain to that target and is very accurate.
We've been seeing pictures of sort of ground-launched munitions and rockets and so on. Bearing in mind that this is air-fired and basically British-supplied, effectively, although the French, I think, have been working on it with the Britain. Does that mean we're going to have to start supplying Tornadoes and other fighter jets to actually launch these things?
No, not at all. The technicians will have worked out how to fit it onto Ukrainian aircraft. And it's not the first Western missile that's been integrated onto Ukrainian aircraft, so there's no danger of us having to supply aircraft to launch this.
So you basically bolt on a sophisticated cruise missile to an old MiG-29?
You do that, or Su-24 or 27. So there's more sophisticated missiles have been bolted on by the Americans, the HARM missiles.
OK, Philip, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your expertise once more. And, of course, as we're saying, that officially acknowledged now by the Defence Secretary, those missiles on their way, or indeed some of them already there. Now, during an interview on Radio 4 this morning, President Zelensky expressed his disappointment that Kyiv, or a neighbouring country to Ukraine, had not been chosen to host this year's Eurovision contest. The European Broadcasting Union inviting the UK, of course, to host on Ukraine's behalf because UK's contestant Sam Ryder was runner-up in last year's contest behind Ukraine's Kalush Orchestra. Let's cross now to reporter Sophie Reaper, who's in Liverpool, which is adopting a bit of a Ukrainian look, we gather, Sophie. Plenty of Ukrainian colours and flags, and indeed lots of activity there in the build-up to, I think it's the second semi tonight, is that right?
That is correct, Mark. These people behind me, they've been coming in droves for the last hour or so, are actually queuing up for the second dress rehearsal for tonight's semi-final. Later this evening, the other acts, those other 16 countries, will be competing to get through to Saturday's grand final. Now, the atmosphere here in Liverpool is absolutely electric. I've been speaking to people all morning and all afternoon, asking them about the importance of it being in Liverpool, how excited they are, and every single person has just said how excited and how thrilled they are that we're able to host it. I actually just moments ago bumped into a Ukrainian refugee who I've previously spoken to, Tatiana, who's attending the semi-final tonight. She was able to get tickets because of her Ukrainian refugee status, and she told me she was so excited for tonight and just so happy that she was able to get tickets and to see her country represented through the United Kingdom here in Liverpool for Eurovision. Of course, other people from the United Kingdom, but also people from all over Europe are out here. We've seen flags from every single nation, every single person, just so excited. I spoke to some of those people a little bit earlier to see what they thought.
You're excited for Eurovision?
Yes.
Tell me why.
Because it's thrilling and Liverpool's going to be amazing because they know how to party and it's just going to be fabulous. How about you? How excited are you?
Yeah, big kudos for the city. Lots of money coming in, lots of visitors. I'm sure that will swell the ranks of the numbers that already come. So it's a big deal for Liverpool.
Yeah. I think it's good to be in UK, but I feel sorry for the Ukraine because they were last year's winners. They were the last winners, and they should be holding in their country.
It's the most exciting thing that we will have seen. I moved here in September from the United States, and it's just wonderful to have the whole world looking at Liverpool and how great the city is.
When it was in Brighton in like the 70s, they still remember it, so it's going to be huge. I think it's going to be massive.
And what about yourself?
Yeah, it's been really good to that. Yeah, really excited. The city's really excited for it. I think it's really nice.
I'm actually really excited. Like I've been here a while ago, and I've really liked the city, so that's why I'm coming again and again.
Of course, one of the best things about Eurovision is that it brings people together, and that's the great thing, that we're able to support Ukraine here in Liverpool this year. They may not have been able to host the contest after they won it last year, but we're certainly able to represent them, and that's absolutely visible here in Liverpool and will be now until the grand final on Saturday.
OK, Sophie, thank you very much indeed for that. Just to reflect, I think the Ukrainian band Go A, who are there, saying it's almost like home, everything painted in Ukrainian colours. So we'll let you get off with your paint pot, yellow and blue, and see what we can catch up a little later. Thanks very much indeed. Or as they say in Liverpool, Tala in Scouse. Anyway, updating you on that in the next hour, as we will, and all this reaction to that breaking news this hour of the base rate of interest being raised yet again by the Bank of England at 4.5%, the highest now since 2008, with the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey saying there are still uncertainties in the outlook for the global economy and in terms of what happens in terms of inflation here in Britain. More in this coming hour. Stay with us.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here with your GB News forecast, brought to you by the Met Office. Sunny spells for many of us today, but interspersed by heavy showers, and once again the threat of thunderstorms and some hail as well. Low pressure, a relatively slack area of low pressure, is sitting over the UK. It's slow moving. There are light winds circulating around this, so only showers that do bubble up through the day will be slow moving, and that's why there's a thunderstorm warning in force for eastern parts of the UK, because here these slow moving showers could cause some impacts. Of course, given the slow moving nature of the showers, some places will avoid the showers altogether and stay dry and bright, so especially western Scotland. That's where the finest weather will be, and temperatures fairly widely across the UK, close to average for the time of year, mid to high teens generally. The showers continue going into the evening for a few hours, but then after dark they do disappear quite quickly. Then it turns drier, but also generally cloudier, with some low cloud drifting in from the east and becoming fairly extensive. Western areas will avoid the cloud with some breaks and temperatures dipping into the mid-single figures, but where we've got the low cloud, it's a grey and chilly start to Friday. Some drizzle coming along for East Anglia and the southeast for a time, along with a wind from the North Sea. That's going to make it feel quite raw through the day, I think, quite disappointingly on the cool side. The low cloud covering the hills in the east as well, and it's going to stick around through much of the afternoon. But in the west, brighter skies develop, and it's largely dry, with temperatures reaching the high teens in some of the favoured spots. Now, we keep that east-west split going into Friday night, and that's really how we start the weekend. A lot of low cloud in the east, clearer spells towards the north and the west, and plenty of sunshine developing throughout Saturday. Saturday's a mainly dry day, but with that low cloud in the east, there will be some patchy drizzle, a band of rain into the north on Sunday.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 1 o'clock. A very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Thursday lunchtime. Interest rates up for the 12th time in a row. The base rate now at 4.5%, the highest figure since 2008. And the banks warning that the cost of living will fall more slowly than previously thought. It's blamed stubbornly high food prices for inflation not falling faster, but the government is, the bank believes, still on target to achieve its promise of halving inflation by the end of the year. And breaking news in this past half hour, the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has confirmed that the UK is donating long-range Storm Shadow cruise missiles to Ukraine. We'll bring you the latest as Russia says it will retaliate. And hands across the Mersey. We're live in Liverpool as the UK steps in to host the contest scheduled to be held originally in Ukraine. We'll be catching up with all that in a moment. First, let's get the latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. UK interest rates have been raised for a 12th time in a row in a further attempt by the Bank of England to tackle soaring inflation. The bank's base rate has increased by 0.25 percentage point from 4.25 to 4.5%, the highest level in 15 years. Economists say it will put further pressure on already struggling mortgage holders and businesses in debt. But the Governor of the Bank of England insists inflation is too high and must come down to the 2% target. Andrew Bailey did say the outlook for the economy in terms of growth and unemployment has improved.
6 months ago, we were expecting a shallow but long recession. Since then, energy prices have fallen substantially, and economic activity is holding up better than expected. So today, we are forecasting modest but positive growth and a much smaller increase in unemployment. We think inflation will fall quite sharply over the coming months, beginning with the April number, which will be released in 2 weeks' time. Energy prices have fallen from their peaks, and that will now start to come through as lower inflation.
Meanwhile, Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves says the rise will be of concern to many British households.
Today will be a day of great anxiety for many families and businesses around the country who are facing the 12th increase in interest rates in just a matter of months. That means higher mortgage costs. Already, people have paid £1 billion more in mortgage repayments compared to where they would have been 6 months ago.
While our economics and business editor Liam Halligan says it could take several months for the changes to benefit the markets.
Given that inflation is likely to fall sharply in the coming months, it may be that this latest interest rate decision looks, as if the Bank of England has now overshot in the other direction. But look, no one's saying monetary policy is easy. The people in the building behind me do have a tough job. I think there should be a broader range of opinions on the Monetary Policy Committee, and I've said that for a long time. And also, no one is saying that these interest rate rises are easy at all. If you've got a mortgage, if you're a business with debt, this will slow the economy down. And the danger is if the Bank of England does yet another interest rate rise in the months to come, then they will crush the UK's fragile economic recovery.
And as we've been hearing in the last half hour, the UK's confirmed it's supplying Ukraine with the long-range missiles it requested for its fight against Russia. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace told MPs the donation of Storm Shadow missiles gives Ukraine the best chance to defend themselves. The decision follows repeated pleas from Kyiv for more weapons from the West. Addressing MPs today, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said the UN has found Russia committed war crimes.
Sadly, so far, at least 23,000 Ukrainian civilians have been killed or wounded, although the actual figure is likely to be substantially higher. Thousands of citizens have been sent to sinister filtration camps before being forcibly relocated to Russia. Some 6,000 children, ranging in ages from 4 months to 17 years, are now in, quote, re-education camps across Russia. The UN, as well as US investigators, have found that Russia has committed war crimes with reported evidence of executions, torture and sexual violence in civilian areas.
Rail services run by operator TransPennine Express are to be brought under government control. The Transport Secretary's announced the decision follows continuous cancellations. Mark Harper says the firm's contract won't be extended, nor will it be renewed. The Department of Transport will instead take over from May the 28th. The train operator, which covers Northern England and runs in parts of Scotland, saw 1 in 6 services cancelled in March. Canada has unveiled its new passport design with more security features and a nod to our newly crowned king. It's the first passport in the Commonwealth to mention the new monarch, but the coat of arms it displays is in fact the Queen's, as the new version was created before King Charles approved it. Plaid Cymru have appointed Llŷr Griffith as interim leader. It follows the resignation of Adam Price last night after a damning report into the Welsh Nationalist Party's culture. The report found the party had failed to implement a zero-tolerance approach to sexual harassment, bullying and misogyny. The appointment will be subject to ratification by the party's National Council on Saturday. The BBC has found there were no concerns about Richard Sharp's integrity whilst he was chairman of the broadcaster. A BBC Conflicts of Interest review was commissioned following Mr Sharp's resignation from the corporation in April, after he was found to have breached the rules for public appointments. The Prime Minister has angered Conservative Brexiteers by scrapping the government's pledge to remove thousands of EU laws by the end of the year. Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch says only 600 will now be revoked from the UK statute book instead of the proposed 4,000. Labour has branded the move a humiliating U-turn from a divided government. Jacob Rees-Mogg, who introduced the plans, has accused Rishi Sunak of abandoning his promise. And the number of people in England waiting to start routine hospital treatment has risen to a new record high. According to NHS England, an estimated 7.3 million people were waiting to start treatment in March. That's up from 7.2 million in February. It's the highest number since records began in August 2007. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much indeed, Rhiannon. Now, plenty more reaction coming in to this decision by the Bank of England to raise the base rate to 4.5%. Just to remind you, 2 members of the Monetary Policy Committee had voted to actually keep rates on hold. Now, in the past few minutes, a couple of think tanks have gone public saying they think the Bank of England has actually got it wrong. The right-wing think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs, warning that the bank at risk of overcorrecting after this rise in interest rates. Trevor Williams, its chair, former chief economist at Lloyds Bank. The Bank of England's helped to create the inflation problem when it said there wasn't a problem. It called it then temporary. It now is running a significant risk of correcting. Mr Williams going on to say, just as the bank failed to identify inflationary pressures at the tail end of the COVID pandemic, they may once again be focusing too much, he said, on present inflation rather than long-run trends. Meanwhile, the IPPR think tank saying the bank should have held off raising interest again, warning of a continued increase in inequality. The current approach risks creating big economic costs, they say. Well, let's speak now here on GB News Live to macroeconomist Philip Pilkington, who can join us. Philip, I don't know if you heard what their views were, those just coming through. I mean, do you share that view that maybe the Bank of England is overcorrecting?
I don't think so. I think the bank has a very hard job at the moment. But the reality is that the UK is now an outlier in terms of its inflation. Inflation in the Eurozone and in Europe is coming down much faster than in Britain. And Britain currently stands at about the same rates as Bosnia and Herzegovina, which, not to say anything bad about Bosnia, but it's a substantially poorer country than the United Kingdom. So that's a bit concerning.
It begs the question then, how effective will this interest rate rise be? Bearing in mind, I think we've got 6.9% headline inflation rate in the Eurozone, 4.9% in the States. And I know, obviously, the European Central Bank and the Fed have been increasing interest rates as well. But it seems to have been more effective there than here in the UK.
I think the key problem here is wages. There's been a lot of denialism, especially from left-leaning and Labour economists, about the possibility of a wage price spiral, which is when inflation gets embedded into your system because workers demand higher wages, despite the fact that living standards are falling secularly due to energy price declines, energy price hikes, and so on. The data that came out recently from recruitment websites suggested that wages are now running at about 10%. Salaries are going up by about 10% a year. That's roughly equivalent to the inflation rate.
Okay.
So this is the key problem, really, and I think maybe the Bank of England are looking at these salary increases and saying we have to get these under control.
What about, though, the issue of food price inflation? Because Andrew Bailey, the governor, has been speaking to reporters in this question and answer session in the past few minutes, saying that food price inflation is stickier than expected, hitting the bank's inflation expectations. And again, one wonders how effective, therefore, is monetary policy going to be in that if the supermarkets, for instance, are pushing prices ever higher?
I think economists are a little divided on what's causing the food price inflation. One theory is that it's due to supply chain disruptions due to the war. Now, that seems pretty credible because a lot of fertilizer for the European Union came from Russia. And obviously that's more difficult to get now that the sanctions have been imposed. But there is also the question of whether rising labour costs aren't hitting food prices. The agricultural sector in Britain is very sensitive to rising labour costs because labour costs are very important in the production of food and so on. The food price increases here are substantially higher than Europe. Europe should be experiencing the same problems with fertilizer that we are. So there seems to be something different happening here as in Europe. And I think that probably is could well be labour costs. And I think the Bank of England is probably of that view given their decision on the rate hike.
OK, well, let's put you on the spot because we've got these forecasts yet again on both inflation and growth. The bank thinking that inflation will be maybe at 5.1% at the end of the year. The OBR Office Budget Responsibility has said 2.9% originally. But interestingly, the bank also thinking that GDP, gross domestic product or growth, could be 2.25% higher at the end of the three-year forecast period than it said back in February, i.e. that would get the economy actually growing again.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. We're either going to see continued inflation, maybe it'll come down a little bit, but it'll probably remain high, and we'll see growth, or we'll see inflation fall in a recession. I really think that at this stage, with these wage hikes, these salary hikes going up, if this data is correct, now it's provisional data, but it's market leading data. If we watch the official data coming out and it tracks with this, and the wages continue rising, I think the reality is that wage growth isn't going to come down unless the employment rate goes up. And the employment rate isn't going to go up unless we get a recession. Now, how bad that recession is, I don't know. But I think at this stage, growth and inflation it's an either or. You can't have both.
OK, although obviously let's reflect the bank had originally been forecasting a shallow recession, but now indicating perhaps that we're not going to have these two subsequent quarters of negative growth. But Philip, thank you very much indeed for your assessment. Let's now move on, though, to the housing market and indeed mortgages in particular. Let's speak to Sally Mitchell, mortgage advisor and broker, who can join us. Sally, thank you very much for your time. I'm just looking at what Knight Frank, which is one of the big sort of posh end, if you like, of the housing market, estate agents, is saying. They don't expect maybe mortgages to go up that much more because it's already been priced in. Do you share that?
It's really difficult to predict what the lenders are going to do. Certainly for anybody on a variable rate or a tracker rate, this will be affecting their monthly payment. They can expect to be paying about another £26 a month on the average mortgage amount. So yes, they're clever. They look ahead. They know potentially what is going to happen with the Bank of England base rate. But believe me, you will see if you're on your variable rate that this extra 0.25% will be passed on to you very, very quickly.
To the already sort of 12 increases that we've got. So the total bill now in cash terms much higher. What's happening on the fixed rate market? Because, of course, that's one of the aspects. A lot of people who are on 2 or 5 year deals are now coming to an end and they're going to have quite a shock.
Yeah, and that's been the same for the last 6-8 months. it has improved. Fixed rates have come down from their height after the mini budget, but we are starting to see adjustments, and lots of lenders are releasing new fixed rates that are slightly higher. Fixed rates are often dictated or more dictated by swap rates, and that's different to the Bank of England base rate. And in the last couple of weeks, we've actually seen them creeping up again by about 0.4%. So that has a direct influence. Fixed rates will fluctuate. If you can, it's the best advice is to fix when you can, when they're low, obviously, and carry that forward into a longer term.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Obviously, we can't give direct financial advice because of FCA rules, etc. But should people still try and hang on to see what happens for these next months and where we are by the end of the year?
Yeah, we recommend that you start looking at the market or talking to a broker 6 months before the end of your fixed rate. A lot of lenders will let you transfer at no cost, with no early repayment charges within that period. I don't think people realise that. You don't have to wait until 2 days before the end of your fixed rate to set yourself up with something that suits you for the future, for the next 2 to 5 years. So talk to a broker 6 months before.
OK. Thank you very much indeed for that. And, of course, we'll wait and see if there's any more rate rises. Some suggesting it could even go to 4.75%, of course, by June. Anyway, thank you for your time. And as Sally said, obviously, shop around to get some advice as well. More reaction now, particularly from the farming sector, because Northern Ireland's enjoying its food and agricultural event of the year, the Balmoral Show, renowned for things such as show jumping and sheep shearing. But, of course, they're looking at the financial markets as well this year. Let's bring in Doogie, who was updating us there yesterday. Doogie, perhaps no surprise to them in terms of this rate rise, but they'll still be crunching the numbers, I guess.
They have been, Mark, very much so. You talk about food inflation. It's getting out of control for a number of reasons. And in amongst those, we reported it about 15 months ago, was the red diesel subsidies being stopped on anything that wasn't to do with agriculture. But that also includes the movement of frozen food in lorries. So you can imagine red diesel is half the cost of white diesel. That green issue was particularly hard on the farming community. If you look at the very trailer I'm standing in, is made by companies that make stuff for not only agriculture but for the construction industry. And now, because tractors that are not connected and excavators that are not directly connected to agriculture are made to run on white diesel, you can imagine a tractor does about 4 or 5 miles to the gallon. It's cheaper to buy a 40-foot lorry and take a digger up the road on a low loader than buy this type of stuff. So that hits our manufacturing also. So this type of legislation that is throwing in and taking stuff out for green issues is really, really hurting not only our food prices but also industries that's connected to the agri-food sector. And I spoke to a few people earlier on in and around the halls of what their thoughts were on the interest rate rises.
Oh, massively. People will not take out loans. They can't afford to repay them if the interest rate's gone up.
Yeah, it's difficult for younger people coming onto the housing market. It's definitely.
I think it's very difficult in the cost of living crisis we are at the moment, and especially when we're in a stage where we're trying to learn more about money and trying to buy a house and trying to make our own stamp of the world in the market. It's very difficult to make your own place in the world when interest rates are just going up and there's no opportunities to save.
Pressure on families and farmers, what it is. I think it's pretty rough on new buyers. It's pretty rough on everyone, really. The higher your mortgage, you're really paying a steeper toll on it. It's a steeper price, so yeah, it's not.
Well, there you go, Mark. That's what the people in Balmoral think. But, of course, there's other problems here as well. We spoke about it yesterday. Liam followed up on it. The pound is now at 85 cents. So because we actually straddle the EU here in Northern Ireland, that means that we are 15% behind trying to export our goods. And when Irish abattoirs are actually paying 30 cents a kilo less for Irish beef than the British ones, it is going to cause real problems to farmers in Northern Ireland particularly. They are now in a bad position with a stronger pound. It's easier to buy in but harder to sell out, and being held inside those rules of the EU.
OK, Doogie, thank you very much indeed for that. And, of course, back to you a little later to get more reaction. But let's just bring you some breaking news now coming in from this court case with alleged unlawful information gathering. The Duke of Sussex, amongst others, bringing action against the publishers of the Mirror Group newspapers. Now, we're being told by the barrister David Sherborne, acting for the Prince and others, that unlawful information gathering authorised at the highest level at the Mirror, the High Court told. On the second day of this case, Mr. Sherborne saying the most seriously troubling feature of the cases were the allegations that those responsible for management and finances of the company were well aware of what was going on. We say the case goes higher than just the journalists, and the condoning of these activities, said, means journalists were able to continue them at this widespread level. And indications too about articles involving Prince Michael of Kent running into debt at the bank, running as a front page story of the Mirror, he said, in January 1999. He said that the article had claimed that Prince Michael, the late Queen's cousin, owed more than £2.5 million to Coutts and Company. I'm going on to say, at the time, Mr. Sherborne said, the editor of the paper was Piers Morgan, a very hands-on editor, he said, and he had a close connection to the board. But the story had been published with sufficient confidence, despite a denial from Prince Michael himself. The barrister alleging that story had been obtained illegally using private investigators, and that private information, he said, had been blagged. So, yet more dramatic allegations made at that High Court case. We'll have the latest on that and update you, as we will, of course, with reaction to the interest rate decision. Stay with us here on GB News Live.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the UK is escalating its commitment to the war in Ukraine by donating long-range Storm Shadow cruise missiles to President Zelensky. The Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, speaking in the Commons just a few minutes ago.
Sadly, so far, at least 23,000 Ukrainian civilians have been killed or wounded, although the actual figure is likely to be substantially higher. Thousands of citizens have been sent to sinister filtration camps before being forcibly relocated to Russia. Some 6,000 children, ranging in ages from 4 months to 17 years, are now in, quote, re-education camps across Russia. The UN, as well as US investigators, have found that Russia has committed war crimes with reported evidence of executions, torture and sexual violence in civilian areas.
Well, Ben Wallace in the Commons. Let's now speak to our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, who's in Downing Street. And Tom, the Defence Secretary going on to say that it was the actions of Russia alone that had led to the system being provided to Ukraine, a calibrated and proportionate response to Russia's escalations, he said.
That's right. The escalations he's talking about are the targeted attacks. So in the eyes of Britain, they're targeted attacks on civilian infrastructure, things that would constitute war crimes, non-legitimate targets, those that aren't just military targets, clearly Ukrainian citizens being killed by these Russian attacks. And it's in the eyes of the British government that the Ukrainians need that step up in support for this longer range capability to deal with those attacks that, of course, are coming long range from deep behind the Russian lines. Now, these Storm Shadow missiles are air launch missiles. They have a range of around 550 kilometres, so far larger than the kit that the Ukrainians are currently using. But Ben Wallace was very clear at the dispatch box in the last hour in the House of Commons to say that this does not sort of come into the same league as the sort of missiles that the Russians have in their banks. These aren't, for example, the hypersonic missiles that the Russians have been using. So this is a proportionate response, so says the British government, not an escalatory one.
They've got a 155-mile range, and that obviously can reach then eastern Ukraine, occupied by the Russians, and Crimea as well, significantly. But I'm just looking at what the Defence Secretary said in concluding his speech. Try as they might, the Kremlin cannot hide the fact their invasion is already failing. They can only occupy the rubble left by their destruction. I mean, it's a pretty stark assessment.
It is, and of course this is all in the run-up to a widely anticipated Ukrainian counter-offensive. The lines of this war have been fairly stable for the last few months, and the Ukrainians have been building up their capabilities. It is widely expected there will be a big spring or perhaps even summer now offensive by the Ukrainians, pushing the Russians back or attempting to do so in one big move, and no doubt supplying missiles like these, as the UK has this week, could feed into that.
Now, we're seeing some sort of land-launched rockets that they've had, some of their own equipment, but they have been asking for more sophisticated weaponry from the West. And we gather these cruise missiles will be launched from aircraft. Defence experts we've spoken to say they can be bolted onto their existing aircraft. But, of course, there's still a question about whether the UK will supply more sophisticated fighters such as the Typhoon.
Yes, big questions around that. Of course, the United Kingdom is training Ukrainian airmen in the UK, indeed training them on British planes, but is not giving those planes across to Ukraine, at least not yet. That is something the government maintains is under review, but the answer to President Zelensky's call when he spoke in Westminster Hall not that long ago, only a few months ago, saying, we have our freedom, give us the wings to protect it. That was his cry to British leaders. The response from this government was it would take more than a year to train Ukrainian pilots on our British jets. Well, there had been some debate over whether that was actually the case and whether it would be a shorter amount of time to train already capable airmen. But as things stand, the United Kingdom not giving over those Typhoon jets, but it is helping train those Ukrainian airmen.
And interestingly, in terms of the response to what the Defence Secretary was saying, I see that the Shadow Defence Secretary, John Healey, is we are united in our determination to help in the defence of Ukraine and our shared values, and we welcome this vital new military support. So clearly everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet on this.
Yes, there's a broad consensus on this issue, and indeed there has been for quite some time. It has not been the case that we've seen significant dissent from really any party in the House of Commons, whether this is with regard to the sanctions packages that have been continually strengthened over the course of the last year plus, or indeed with regard to the military support. Those who have been speaking out against this sort of military support really come from the fringes of political debate.
Tom, in Downing Street, thank you very much indeed for that. And, of course, more political reaction as we get it, as we will indeed on the interest rate decision. In fact, we can now update you on what the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has had to say. Official response here from the Treasury. Although it's good news the Bank of England is no longer forecasting recession, today's interest rate rise, said Jeremy Hunt, will obviously be very disappointing for families with mortgages. But unless we tackle rising prices, the cost of living crisis will only carry on, which is why we need to be resolute in sticking to our plan to halve inflation by the end of the year. And just to update you, of course, the bank forecasting that they believe inflation will be at 5.1% by the end of the year, just about scraping under that halving target that the government had announced. But more reaction to that as we get it. Let's get an update now on all the latest headlines. Rhiannon's waiting for us.
Mark, thank you. It's 1:32, your top stories from the GB newsroom. UK interest rates have been raised for a 12th time in a row in a further attempt by the Bank of England to tackle soaring inflation. The bank's base rate has increased by 1/4 percentage point from 4.25 to 4.5%, the highest level in 15 years. Economists say it'll put further pressure on already struggling mortgage holders and businesses in debt. But the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, says the outlook for growth and unemployment has improved.
6 months ago, we were expecting a shallow but long recession. Since then, energy prices have fallen substantially, and economic activity is holding up better than expected. So today, we are forecasting modest but positive growth and a much smaller increase in unemployment. We think inflation will fall quite sharply over the coming months, beginning with the April number, which will be released in 2 weeks' time.
Meanwhile, Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves says the rise will be of concern to many British households.
Today will be a day of great anxiety for many families and businesses around the country who are facing the 12th increase in interest rates in just a matter of months. That means higher mortgage costs already. People have paid £1 billion more in mortgage repayments compared to where they would have been 6 months ago.
The UK's confirmed it's supplying Ukraine with the long-range missiles it requested for its fight against Russia. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has told MPs the donation of Storm Shadow missiles gives Ukraine the best chance to defend themselves. The decision follows Kyiv's repeated pleas for more weapons from the West. And the BBC has found there were no concerns about Richard Sharp's integrity whilst he was chairman of the broadcaster. A BBC Conflicts of Interest review was commissioned following Mr Sharp's resignation from the corporation in April, after he was found to have breached the rules for public appointments. TV online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2598 and 1.1526 euros. The price of gold is £1,616.54 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,715 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, should we talk about Donald Trump? Because certainly he talked about himself at his first public appearance since that civil jury in New York found him guilty of sexual assault and also defaming E. Jean Carroll, the columnist. Well, the former president remained defiant, denying he'd even known her, describing her as, quote, a whack job. Amongst other things, Mr. Trump also saying if he were to be re-elected, he would be inclined to pardon a large portion of those who've been prosecuted for their part in the storming of the Capitol back in January 2021. Also claimed he would end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours, he added. Let's get the views now of the founding director of the UCL Centre on US Politics, Dr. Thomas Gift. And Thomas, Trump does seem to be the gift that keeps on giving in terms of political analysis.
Absolutely. And, you know, in terms of the politics, Trump did, I think, last night exactly what he wanted to do. He's in the midst of a Republican primary. He wants to play to his base. And so that's what he did. He threw red meat to them on January 6th on allegations of a stolen election. He even called the moderator, Caitlin Collins, a nasty person on stage. And you could see from the reactions of the crowd, which was Republican primary voters, his supporters were really lapping it up. So, yeah, I mean, Trump is certainly the gift that keeps on giving for political commentary.
And maybe there are some at CNN just wondering whether they did the right thing in the right place at the right time. But clearly, obviously, this is the Trump approach to double down and to maybe try and inflame, some would say, his own supporters. But we do have, you know, senior Republicans, such as this senator in Texas, saying, well, this may play well with his base, but what's going to happen when we get into the presidential race with a wider electorate, particularly, you know, the floating voters such as the so-called soccer mums?
Right. I mean, that's always the big question with Donald Trump, which is, you know, he has this core of support among the Republican base, but how does that translate into a general election? And of course, in 2020, he wasn't able to get a broad enough appeal to actually win that election. But if, you know, for Donald Trump right now, I think he's focused on first things first, get through the Republican primary. And man, his poll numbers have really been going through the roof of late. A number of different challengers like Ron DeSantis have really fallen over the last few weeks. And you have to say at this point, Donald Trump is the prohibitive favorite. As you said, he really is taking this strategy of kind of double down on galvanizing his supporters.
What's happened to DeSantis? We didn't even hear him coming out to react to this jury decision in New York. Seemingly, you know, he's, as you say, falling further and further back in terms of the Republican polling.
Well, I think Ron DeSantis is in a really difficult spot right now. Of course, he hasn't even officially launched his campaign, although he's indicated that he's planning to do so within the next month or so. But he's in this kind of purgatory in which he can't really come out and attack Donald Trump as hard as he likes, because that would alienate the base. But at the same time, you know, just kind of stepping back and not saying anything also seems to not be a very helpful strategy. And so I think the combination of that and also some of his focus on Florida, woke culture wars and these sorts of things, which are not necessarily making the news like it was a few months ago, that combination of factors has led to him decline in the polls.
Well, we're talking of making the news, and in terms of political balance, let's talk about the Democrats and Joe Biden. I mean, we've got this extraordinary claim or quote at this Democratic Party event in New York yesterday, saying that he'd visited Ireland to ensure the Brits didn't screw around. Of course, the four-day trip reflecting his Irish roots. But in terms of political approach, perhaps it might raise a few eyebrows.
It might, although I have to say I'm not sure if this is as big of an issue here in the UK as it is in the United States. And so just in terms of the domestic politics, as Joe Biden faces, you know, no primary challenger and then is heading into the general election, I just doubt that this is going to be a big issue. Hasn't really made headlines or been sort of the focus of news in the United States. But, you know, still, it's certainly an issue, of course, over here in the UK as well.
Yeah, indeed. Well, we remember, of course, the unease from the DUP and other parties in Northern Ireland at his intervention in perhaps going to Ireland itself, the Republic, rather more than Northern Ireland. I'm just looking at the quote directly. I got to go back to Ireland for the Irish Accords to make sure they weren't, the Brits, didn't screw around and Northern Ireland didn't walk away from their commitments. It's not exactly emollient language, is it?
Well, it's not. And I'm not an expert on this topic, and so I can't speak to it too much. But certainly it's raising eyebrows and, you know, probably rightfully so.
OK, Dr. Thomas Gift, thanks very much indeed for joining us. UCL Centre on US Politics, of course. Thank you very much indeed. Now, let's bring you up to date with this other breaking news we've had in terms of the supplying of these Storm Chaser missiles, cruise missiles to Ukraine. The Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, speaking in the Commons a little earlier, confirming that Britain will be supplying these missiles ahead of the highly anticipated spring counter-offensive that Ukraine is expected to launch against Russia. Now, just to remind you, this is quite a sophisticated weapon, a cruise missile with a range of around 180 155 miles that could allow Ukraine to fire into Russian-held territory in the east of Ukraine and perhaps even into Crimea. Well, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, had previously given strong hints that Britain was considering sending longer-range weapons to President Zelensky. Let's get the views now of former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, Major General Chip Chapman, who can join us. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I mean, the original leak, I think, came from the Pentagon, US sources indicating that this might happen, and then Ben Wallace confirming to the Commons. I mean, clearly there is a little bit of sensitivity about it.
Well, we first heard about this in February, and the real reason for the announcement now is the capability integration that needs to go on to make sure that this air-launched cruise missile, which is what it is, can be used from Soviet-era equipment, because I assume it's going to be fired from a MiG-29. So that's why it's been announced now. It's operational rather than a sort of a weapon system that we need to think about how we're going to integrate it. It's going to be used in the deep battle. Its significance is in terms of interior lines. It can reach both to Crimea, Melitopol, both those places from Kherson, and anywhere in the Donbass. So in terms of how the Ukrainians structure their deep battle to take out either fixed installations, things like railheads or fuel depots, or fixed headquarters, it gives them a greater reach than they had with most of their weapon systems, but they do have their own drones.
But we understand the UK has asked Ukraine for an undertaking that they're not going to fire these into Russia itself. However, of course, we know that Russia believes that these areas of eastern Ukraine now have been annexed as such and are part of the motherland.
That's right, but I don't see that any of that is escalatory. That is illegal annexation in international law, the same reason that Crimea is. So that is not a reason for any thoughts of escalation. And one of the things we know from the last 15 months really is that Russia talks a great rhetorical game about escalation, but doesn't do it. So no NATO country has had an attack from Russia, even though the supply lines have come from all those the NATO countries which border Ukraine. Neither did it actually attack Finland or Sweden in their rise to NATO membership. So we want to be a bit careful about saying this is escalatory. It's not. Its range is far less than the air-launched cruise missiles that the Russians use. But the interior lines thing is the key one from a Ukrainian perspective.
But I'm just looking at what Tobias Ellwood, who's the chair of the Defence Committee, has been saying in response to Ben Wallace. This isn't going to end simply when the Ukrainians decide to push forward. We should expect Russia to go ugly, to use unconventional systems in response. And certainly Ben Wallace obviously has spoken already about their use of white phosphorus, for instance.
Well, white phosphorus is banned under international law. Doesn't mean the Russians won't use it. I think you have to look really more in terms of hybrid effects. You know, it's going after the undersea cables in the North Sea and the Baltic and things like that if they're losing, not sort of going towards the nuclear option, because both China would be against that. NATO would probably come to the assistance. So more in terms of the grey zone, the hybrid warfare, than anything that they could escalate in other ways, because really there's not much else they can escalate with at the moment. Chemical weapons interfering with the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, there too, which people worry about. We still should worry about nuclear escalation, but it's very low probability, high impact, but low probability at the moment.
Yeah, OK. Now, obviously, as you say, that the understanding is we can bolt these very sophisticated missiles onto MiG-29s, Su-27s and so on. But I'm just looking again what Ben Wallace has been saying in the past few minutes. We offered the Ukrainians training on Typhoons. I recently received a letter turning that off as a request and asking us for support on the F-16, which we don't hold. However, I would encourage anybody to gift F-16s to help the Ukrainians. So clearly the Ukrainians still wanting these aircraft to perhaps get air superiority.
Yeah, I mean, one of the key factors in success in 20th century warfare was control of the air, along with shock, surprise, and offensive recce. They can do the offensive recce, the shock and surprise with their combined arms manoeuvre. They don't have the air superiority. Having that would be great. They can't wait, I don't think, for the F-16s to come online. It's the scale of the F-16 fleet, which is why they want it, rather than sort of penny packets from European Typhoons or whatever it might be, Tornadoes or legacy aircraft.
OK, and presumably then the equipment that would have to go with it and the pilot training. But given all this activity, what's your best guess now about the so-called counter-offensive, or the spring offensive, as some have called it, in terms of a major battle ensuing?
Well, the Ukrainians seek to mystify, mislead and surprise, so they still have a number of options of places they could go. They could cut south from Zaporizhia, they could go east from Kherson, they could go either via Luhansk or Donetsk. So they've got a number of options, and keeping the Russians dancing to their tune is what they want to try and... I still think we're a way away from that, both in terms of making sure their capability is in train, and also from the pedologist, that's the soil scientist. You need the load-bearing soil to enable you to manoeuvre. We're still probably a week or two away from that.
OK, in terms of the ground being able to cope with all that armour and so on. Major General Chip Chapman, as ever, thank you for joining us and bringing us your expert analysis here on GB News. Thank you. And, of course, more coming through from the Commons as Ben Wallace is outlining the missiles. I don't think we'll get the exact numbers of what's being supplied, but certainly more reaction coming in as we speak. Now, during an interview on Radio 4 this morning, President Zelensky had expressed disappointment that Kyiv, or a neighbouring country to Ukraine, had not been chosen to host this year's Eurovision contest. Well, the European Broadcasting Union, of course, inviting the UK to host on Ukraine's behalf, because it was the UK's contestant Sam Ryder who was the runner-up in last year's contest behind Ukraine's Kalush Orchestra. But the atmosphere, nonetheless, continuing to build in Liverpool. Let's cross there live and join our reporter Sophie Reaper, who's been soaking up the atmosphere and, well, a bit of music as well, hopefully, Sophie.
Absolutely. I mean, it may seem a bit quiet where I am right now, but that's because the masses of people who were stood here just 10 minutes ago have now gone inside the M&S Bank Arena in order to take in the dress rehearsal of tonight's semi-final number 2. Of course, semi-final number 1 took place on Tuesday when the 10 acts that will go through to the grand final were selected. A further 10 acts will go through tonight, and then the big 5, including the United Kingdom and last year's winners Ukraine, will all compete. So 26 acts will compete on Saturday night. In terms of atmosphere here in Liverpool, it's just been absolutely electric. Everybody getting involved in the Eurovision spirit. Of course, this is the first time the United Kingdom has hosted Eurovision when it's been in the northwest. It's been hosted this is the 9th time the UK has held it, but it's never come to the northwest before. We've had it in Birmingham, it's been in London, Brighton, Edinburgh, even Harrogate has hosted Eurovision before, but never in the northwest. So I think people here in the region are really, really excited. This is what some of them had to say a little bit earlier on.
We always have a good time with Eurovision every single year. It's always a good laugh, it's a good party. There's always like really good camp vibes, and it's just one big party, and that's what we love about Eurovision. I've been doing it for a long time.
Who are you cheering for this year?
Oh, I don't even know the roster at all. I go into it purely blind on the day.
Norway.
You'll say Norway, aren't you?
I mean, still spot the UK, but I think Norway will probably be favourites.
Yeah, I mean,
it's one big party, really, and the fact that so many different people from different countries are coming over, and it's just, yeah, we're excited that it's in the UK this time. It never, ever happens.
Definitely excited for the first time in my life it's been in England.
Yeah.
It's absolutely amazing. We're going to get to be at an event for it, so really excited for everything.
Yeah.
Well, I'm supporting Iceland because I'm doing a master's degree there, and then the UK because we're from the UK, and Australia because we've got a family from Australia,
Romania
because friends from Romania.
Tapestry of countries you're supporting then. What does it mean to have it in, I know you're originally from the UK, what does it mean to have it in the UK this year?
I think it's great to show the diversity.
Well, as we just heard there's plenty of people here out in Liverpool enjoying the atmosphere and the festivities taking place. Not just supporting the United Kingdom, it's worth adding. I've spoken to lots of people who have come from all over Europe and Australia there as well. We heard one lady from Australia who are supporting various different countries. Whether or not they're supporting the UK, whether or not they're supporting other countries, though, one thing everyone's agreeing on is that the atmosphere here in Liverpool is absolutely electric, and that they've done a phenomenal job of representing for Ukraine.
And of course, the musical legacy, I gather, lots of people visiting Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields, the Cavern and so on. Certain musical legacy to be enjoyed there.
I mean, of course, the Beatles being the most famous, as you mentioned there are so many other musical legends from Liverpool, from the Northwest as a whole, really. The musical heritage up here is just incredible, and I think that's something that's really being reflected.
OK, thank you very much indeed for updating us there in Liverpool. Be back with you a little later. Just to reflect, the Ukrainian band Go A saying Liverpool almost like home, Ukrainian installations and everything painted in Ukrainian colours. So a very, very warm welcome from the Scousers there. Coming up in this next hour, be back to Liverpool, of course, and also back to the Bank of England to get the latest from our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan. Just to remind you that we've got the interest rates going up, but the Bank of England governor saying the economy's still on track to halve inflation by the end of the year, along with the government's promises, and even perhaps growth in the economy as well. But we're crunching all the numbers for you in the next hour. Stay with us here on GB News Live.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here with your GB News forecast, brought to you by the Met Office. Sunny spells for many of us today, but interspersed by heavy showers, and once again the threat of thunderstorms and some hail as well. Low pressure, a relatively slack area of low pressure, is sitting over the UK. It's slow moving. There are light winds circulating around this, so only showers that do bubble up through the day will be slow moving, and that's why there's a thunderstorm warning in force for eastern parts of the UK, because here these slow moving showers could cause some impacts. Of course, given the slow moving nature of the showers, some places will avoid the showers altogether and stay dry and bright, so especially western Scotland. That's where the finest weather will be, and temperatures fairly widely across the UK, close to average for the time of year, mid to high teens generally. The showers continue going into the evening for a few hours, but then after dark they do disappear quite quickly. Then it turns drier, but also generally cloudier, with some low cloud drifting in from the east and becoming fairly extensive. Western areas will avoid the cloud with some breaks and temperatures dipping into the mid-single figures. But where we've got the low cloud, it's a grey and chilly start to Friday. Some drizzle coming along for East Anglia and the southeast for a time, along with a wind from the North Sea. That's going to make it feel quite raw through the day, I think, quite disappointingly on the cool side. The low cloud covering the hills in the east as well, and it's going to stick around through much of the afternoon. But in the west, brighter skies develop, and it's largely dry, with temperatures reaching the high teens in some of the favoured spots. Now, we keep that east-west split going into Friday night, and that's really how we start the weekend. A lot of low cloud in the east, clearer spells towards the north and the west, and plenty of sunshine developing throughout Saturday. Saturday's a mainly dry day, but with that low cloud in the east, there will be some patchy drizzle. A band of rain into the north on Sunday.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 2 o'clock. A very good afternoon to you. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Thursday afternoon. Interest rates up for the 12th time in a row. The base rate now at 4.5%. That's the highest level since 2008. And the Bank of England warning the cost of living will fall more slowly than it previously thought. It's blaming stubbornly high food prices for the inflation not falling faster. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has said the rise would be very disappointing for families with mortgages. Close quotes. And the UK is increasing its commitment to Ukraine. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace telling the Commons the UK is donating long-range Storm Shadow cruise missiles to Ukraine. Also coming up, hands across the Mersey. We're live in Liverpool as the UK steps in to host the contest scheduled to be held in Ukraine. You'll be hearing all the latest there from Merseyside. But first, update on the news headlines with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. UK interest rates have been raised for a 12th time in a row in a further attempt by the Bank of England to tackle soaring inflation. The bank's base rate has increased by 0.25 percentage point from 4.25 to 4.5%, the highest level in 15 years. Economists say it will put further pressure on already struggling mortgage holders and businesses in debt. But the Governor of the Bank of England insists inflation is too high and must come down to its target of 2%. Andrew Bailey did, however, say the outlook for growth and unemployment has improved.
6 months ago, we were expecting a shallow but long recession. Since then, energy prices have fallen substantially and economic activity is holding up better than expected. So today we are forecasting modest but positive growth and a much smaller increase in unemployment. We think inflation will fall quite sharply over the coming months, beginning with the April number, which will be released in 2 weeks' time.
Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves says the rise will be of concern to many British households.
Today will be a day of great anxiety for many families and businesses around the country who are facing the 12th increase in interest rates in just a matter of months. That means higher mortgage costs. Already, people have paid £1 billion more in mortgage repayments compared to where they would have been 6 months ago.
While our economics and business editor Liam Halligan says it could take several months for the changes to benefit the markets.
Given that inflation is likely to fall sharply in the coming months, it may be that this latest interest rate decision looks, as if the Bank of England has now overshot in the other direction. But look, no one's saying monetary policy is easy. The people in the building behind me do have a tough job. I think there should be a broader range of opinions on the Monetary Policy Committee, and I've said that for a long time. And also, no one is saying that these interest rate rises are easy at all. If you've got a mortgage, if you're a business with debt, this will slow the economy down. And the danger is if the Bank of England does yet another interest rate rise in the months to come, then they will crush the UK's fragile economic recovery.
The UK has confirmed it's supplying Ukraine with the long-range missiles it requested for its fight against Russia. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says the donation of Storm Shadow missiles gives Ukraine the best chance to defend themselves. The decision follows Kyiv's repeated pleas for more weapons from the West. Addressing MPs earlier, Ben Wallace also said the United Nations had found Russia has committed war crimes.
Sadly, so far, at least 23,000 Ukrainian civilians have been killed or wounded, although the actual figure is likely to be substantially higher. Thousands of citizens have been sent to sinister filtration camps before being forcibly relocated to Russia. Some 6,000 children, ranging in ages from 4 months to 17 years, are now in, quote, re-education camps across Russia. The UN, as well as US investigators, have found that Russia has committed war crimes with reported evidence of executions, torture and sexual violence in civilian areas.
Rail services run by operator TransPennine Express are to be brought under government control. Excuse me. The Transport Secretary has announced the decision follows continuous cancellations. Mark Harper says the firm's contract won't be extended, nor will it be renewed. The Department of Transport will instead take over from May the 28th. The train operator, which covers Northern England and runs in parts of Scotland, saw 1 in 6 services cancelled in March. Plaid Cymru have appointed Claire Griffith as interim leader. It follows the resignation of Adam Price last night after a damning report into the Welsh Nationalist Party's culture. The report found the party had failed to implement a zero-tolerance approach to sexual harassment, bullying and misogyny. The appointment will be subject to ratification by the party's National Council on Saturday. The BBC has found there were no concerns about Richard Sharp's integrity whilst he was chairman of the broadcaster. A BBC conflicts of interest review was commissioned following Mr Sharp's resignation from the corporation in April, after he was found to have breached the rules for public appointments. The Prime Minister has angered Conservative Brexiteers by scrapping the government's pledge to remove thousands of EU laws by the end of the year. Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch says only 600 will now be revoked from the UK statute book instead of the proposed 4,000. Labour has branded the move a humiliating U-turn from a divided government. Jacob Rees-Mogg, who introduced the plans, has accused Rishi Sunak of abandoning his promise. And the number of people in England waiting to start routine hospital treatment has risen to a new record high. According to NHS England, an estimated 7.3 million people were waiting to start treatment in March. That's up from 7.2 million in February. It's the highest number since records began in August 2007. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Mark.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. So, our interest rates have been raised for a 12th time in a row, a further attempt by the Bank of England to tackle soaring inflation. The base rate increasing by that quarter of a point to 4.25% to 4.5% from 4.25%. So now at the highest level in 15 years. So economists saying it's going to put pressure on already struggling mortgage holders and businesses, many of them in debt. But the governor of the bank insisting inflation is still too high and must come down to meet its mandated target of 2%, but adding that the outlook for the economy in terms of growth, unemployment, well, that had improved. Let's get more of our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, who's outside the Bank of England for us now. And Liam, of course, this is the fact, it's not just the interest rate decision, it's the outlook and the forecast from the bank and its economists. So a bit of a mixed picture, really.
It is very much a mixed picture, Mark. I'm standing outside the Bank of England here in the City of London. It's a bit damp, as you can see, but I've just come out from the bank. Since I spoke to you last, I've been in a press conference with the Governor of the Bank of England, with the Deputy Governor, Ben Broadbent, and other officials. And I must say, the atmosphere in the briefing and the questions from the press, even the rather sort of jejune, low-key economics editor type journalists, it was pretty hostile, but I'll come to that later. Let's just have a little look at the path of interest rates here in the UK. Since early 2017, of course, rates were going up a little bit. They were recovering from after the global financial crisis in 2008. They went up to 0.75%. Then lockdown happened, straight back down to 0.1%, the lowest in history, a tenth of 1%, all through lockdown. Then in December 21, rates started rising as UK inflation started to hit a 30-year high, even before the war in Ukraine. Then 12 successive rate rises. You can see that escalator of rate rises all the way up to today's rate of 4.5%. This is the highest interest rate in 15 years, Mark. It does mean that mortgage holders, if they're on a variable rate, they will pay a little bit more, possibly a couple of £100 more per month, depending on the size of their loan. Companies will pay more to raise money, make it harder for them to grow. And if you've got personal loans as well, they will be more expensive. That's what monetary policy is all about. It is a blunt instrument. The bank is still trying to bear down on inflation. Inflation is still 10.1%, much higher than in the Eurozone or in the US, though there are signs now from what we heard from the bank that inflation is going to start to fall soon, quite sharply.
And indeed, the fact that it might hit, or the undertaking of halving inflation by the end of the year, they think 5.1%. But interesting what you were saying about the response or the welcome or otherwise that the reporters and the analysts gave the Bank of England governor, because, of course, we reflect that it wasn't unanimous. 2 members of the Monetary Policy Committee wanted to keep rates on hold at the moment.
I don't think anyone in the sort of economic press is concerned that there are some variations of opinion across the Monetary Policy Committee. In fact, many of us want more variations in opinion, a bit less groupthink, a bit more intellectual challenge to the consensus. What the governor said is that the bank forecasts not just higher growth now, the outlook for growth in the UK, the bank said the UK was going to contract this year and next year. GDP was going to contract, the economy was going to get smaller. Both those rather gloomy forecasts have now been reversed. They foresee growth this year and next year. The governor also said that in what we call the second quarter, that's April, May and June, months 3, 4, 5 and 6 of the year, inflation will be on average 8.2%, much higher than its March level of 10.1%. So the cost of living crisis should now start to ease. I say that when the bank publishes the next inflation number, the April number, in a couple of weeks' time, it will start with an 8. I've said that to you in the past, Mark, a couple of weeks ago, and I'm doubling down on that forecast now. But what a lot of the economic journalists in the press conference in the Bank of England behind me were saying, including me, they were saying to the Bank of England, look, why were you so slow to start raising interest rates? Interest rates have gone up incrementally. They've gone up further than in other countries, and inflation is still higher. Inflation's 10.1% here, as I said. It's 7% in the Eurozone on the continent, and it's just 4.9% in the US. Far from transitory, as the Bank of England said inflation would be, it's actually proved to be very, very stubborn here in the UK. So yes, the cost of living squeeze is going to ease over the coming months and particularly towards the end of the year. Yes, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is likely to fulfil his pledge that inflation will be halved from 10.1 by the end of the year. But look, this isn't about prices going down, Mark. This is about prices going up less quickly. We must be absolutely clear about that. There are still lots of inflationary pressures in the pipeline. Food price inflation is still up at almost 20%. That was a big subject, with the bank not quite criticising the supermarkets, but saying it did expect food prices to fall quite quickly. Overall, I think everyone in the press conference agreed that this is the biggest test of the Bank of England since it became independent under New Labour, when Gordon Brown was Chancellor in the late 1990s. Inflation should be at 2%, Mark. It's now at 10.1%, despite the Bank of England raising interest rates 12 times in a row. These are uncertain times.
But at least they seem to be dampening things down there at the bank, if you pardon the expression. Thanks for bearing with the rain threatening Needle Street and updating us. Liam, thank you very much indeed. Let's get the views now of the Deputy Director of Macroeconomics at the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, NEICR. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen, for joining us, because you are one of the think tanks that thinks inflation is going to remain, I think, persistently higher than expected, is the phrase that you've used. Therefore, we may even get another interest rate rise coming along in perhaps June or later.
Well, I think it's possible. I mean, having seen the monetary policy report coming out today, it looks like the bank doesn't expect to be raising interest rates again. So if inflation comes in line with their forecast, I suspect we may be at the peak. That said, we at NISA think inflation is going to be just a little bit more persistent than the bank does. We're roughly a 0.5 percentage point higher on inflation for the rest of this year and into 2024. So if the actual numbers panned out the way we're expecting them, then yes, there could be another bank rate rise.
Right, I think I'm right in saying your figure is 5.4% for the end of 2023. I think the bank was looking at about 5.1%, but we remember the Office of Budget Responsibility had been talking about 2.9% by the end of the year.
They had indeed. I think, well, inflation did come out more high and more persistent than certainly everybody was expecting. But I think, to be honest, the Office of Budget Responsibility were a little bit of an outlier to begin with. I strongly suspect that when they redo their forecast towards the end of the year, they'll be on a much higher path than they were back in March.
The flip side of this, of course, is that many economists are worried that, pressing this brake pedal so hard will actually stall the economy. The bank is now not just saying, there's no shallow recession that we were originally forecasting. It's indicating it believes GDP could be 2.25% higher at the end of its 3-year forecast period. The sort of biggest upgrade since the Monetary Policy Committee was formed back in 1997. They're really trying to put a gloss on it.
Yes, I think the thing to appreciate there is that their forecast, the previous forecast, was really dismal for GDP growth. So even though they've revised it up by a lot, it's not that we're going to see very strong and very fast GDP growth. I mean, the economy is going to grow very slowly for the next couple of years. But that is a lot better than it could have been.
Yeah, and we're talking about these figures and forecasts and so on. I mean, the reality is, I think, as the Citizens Advice Bureau has reflected, for many people, life is getting worse, not better. And, one reflects really what this is going to do to people who've had to put up with not just the mortgage rates increasing, but just buying things like the groceries at 19.1%, I think it hit in terms of that inflation figure.
Yeah, that's correct. And unfortunately, the big drivers of inflation, as you mentioned, food and energy prices over the past year, they tend to hit poorer households much harder than richer households because they just spend that much more of their income on these things. So although, the economy is going to grow a little bit, it's certainly not going to feel like that for an awful lot of people. And it's the role of the government to support those people who need the support, who are taking the hit in their real incomes.
Indeed. Stephen Miller, thank you much for bringing us your reaction. And, of course, we'll continue to assess what the economists and think tanks think. But let's now join our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, at the Red Lion pub in Lincolnshire, or outside the Red Lion pub in Lincolnshire, because, of course, it's not just the hospitality sector and they've been really badly hit. It's the customers as well, looking at the price of their pint, I guess, Will.
Yes, of course. When we're talking about interest rates, the first thing that comes to mind is how much your costs are going to go up, your cost of your mortgage, how much you're having to pay back, how many extra pounds you're going to have to put down on a loan. But then you think about what's left over, and it's that disposable income that often comes to places like the Red Lion in Caythorpe near Grantham, and that's the money that people can spend on their Sunday lunches or having a few beers or a glass of wine or even a non-alcoholic drink with their friends. I've been speaking a little bit with the business owner, a guy called Simon Farr. He's been talking to me a little bit about how the last couple of years have been for him, as well as reflecting on this new figure. One of the things that he noted was the price of a pint has had to go up by about 30p just to match that inflation figure, running at 10.1% for the year, in March. And then, but in terms of food inflation, that's up by reaches 19%. So it really is the food that's driving it up. He said to me that the cost of his roast dinners, his Sunday lunches, they're up from about £15 to £18 just to match that level of inflation. And you can hear a little bit more from Simon in a clip we've got for you now.
Well, look, it's bad news, isn't it, really, overall? So I think it's just a further pinch on people's leisure spend, which will have an effect on what people will spend when they come to the pub. Look, it's going to be mixed. We're quite fortunate. We're in the clifftop villages of coming from Grantham to Lincoln, so a little bit of a better off area, if you like, the demographic. But there are certainly going to be people who are feeling the pinch. I don't think they'll stop coming. I just think they'll spend less. So they won't stay as long, and probably not have 2 or 3 courses, just have the one and off they go.
One of the things that Simon was reflecting on to me was that a lot of places where they serve food and they get a lot of custom, particularly country pubs, they might fare a little bit better out of this because the food means that they can get a lot of people in and make a little bit more money on it. What he said, though, for people that run businesses that are pretty much just alcohol, that's something called a wet-led pub, they might see a tougher time just because they're not necessarily having those big numbers of people coming in where they're spending lots of money in one go. If you're coming in to have 1 or 2 pints and you're choosing to have even fewer because of the rising costs, those sorts of businesses might really struggle industry with higher interest rates.
Yeah. Will, thank you very much indeed for updating us there in Lincolnshire. Let's just bring you some breaking news. We're getting from Pakistan. The Supreme Court there has ruled that the former Prime Minister Imran Khan, who was arrested on corruption charges this week, that action was illegal. The court has ordered him to be immediately released. His lawyers, of course, had argued the detention from court premises in Islamabad on Tuesday was unlawful. The Supreme Court agreeing with that. Of course, 10 people have been killed so far, 2,000 arrested with the violent protests that swept the country since he was held. So more reaction on that coming up. Also, we'll be reflecting on why the Brexit bonfire has been a bit of a damp squib, speaking to Chris Hope from the Telegraph, who broke the story. Coming up in a moment. Stay with us on GB News Live.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us 4, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the Prime Minister and indeed Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch's angered Brexiteers by scaling back the promised post-Brexit bonfire, as they called it, of EU laws by the end of the year. Kemi Badenoch saying around 600 laws will be revoked from the statute book rather than the 4,000 originally indicated. But today she told the Commons that the 600 piece is not the limit of the government's plan. Shadow Business Minister, meanwhile, Justin Matters, calling it unrealistic and reckless of the government to think it could scrap thousands of laws by the end of the year. Well, let's now speak to Chris Hope from The Telegraph at Westminster, who broke the story. Much, it seems, Chris, to the Speaker's chagrin. He's criticised Kemi Badenoch for not revealing this to the Commons first before The Telegraph carried the story.
It does seem quite underhand the way it all happened. What happened is you row back a few months, Rishi Sunak said they would axe as many as 4,000 redundant EU laws from the statute book as part of the Brexit dividend by Christmas. That date is now gone, and only a few hundred might go, although Ms Badenoch told the Commons maybe 2,000 may have gone already, but the figure is around a few hundred, that's the problem. The big problem from the Speaker is that all this came out in the Telegraph newspaper. And even the final announcement yesterday was made overnight, I should say, in the House of Lords, not in the Commons. And so unusually, an urgent question was granted to a Tory backbencher, summoning his own government to announce it to the Parliament. It's all very embarrassing for Kemi Badenoch, not least because she's a favourite to succeed Rishi Sunak if there's an election that goes. Badenoch is seen as a person who might take over running the party. Yeah. Well, that has taken a big dent, I think, with over this.
We're just getting interference on the signal at the moment, Chris. We'll try and stay with it, but I'm just going to update people with what appears to have been the conversation, perhaps we put it that way, between Sir Lindsay and the Minister. Is an off-microphone remark, we're being told, from Kemi Badenoch, in which she appeared to be saying she's not the right procedure. Sir Lindsay said, "Who do you think you're speaking to, Secretary of State? I think we need to understand each other. I am the defender of this House and these benches on both sides. I'm not going to be spoken to by a Secretary of State who is absolutely not accepting my ruling." So, you know, it's quite a spat.
Yeah. It's been a bad few days for her, I think, and she's been. She spoke to the ERG, these Brexiteers, last week about her plans, and for many Tories, particularly the Tory base, who had no say over wanted was Liz Truss, and they probably wanted Boris Johnson too, and both those people were committed to being firmer on Brexit. They wonder what's happened here. And I do sense there's a question mark about really what is the commitment to Brexit amongst the top of the party. Brexiteers can't understand why this has dropped.
Yeah, we've got a problem, Chris, with the signal. We're getting interference, so apologies for that. We'll have to leave it. But just to reflect that Dave Penman from the Civil Service Union, the FDA, reflected on Kemi Badenoch's assertion, rather, that there was a change of approach, not policy. Mr Penman saying that there was an artificial deadline that had been imposed, and this was a bizarre way of doing business, indicating there's no way that all the EU regulations could have been reassessed by by the end of this year. Apologies for that signal there at Westminster, but certainly we've got the indication from Chris as to what the backbenchers feel. Now, let's return to this issue of interest rates raised for the 12th time in a row earlier. A further attempt by the Bank of England to tackle soaring inflation, the base rate now at 4.5%. What does it mean, of course, for the housing market? Let's catch up with our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's down at Godalming in Surrey with speaking to estate agents there. Of course, a lot of people trying to do the numbers as to can they move house, can they buy a house?
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And in fact, if you're watching this and you're thinking, well, what are going to be the numbers then with this? First of all, depends. Are you one of the 86% of mortgages that are fixed, or are you one of the minority who's on a tracker or a variable mortgage? In which case, if you're on a tracker or a variable, obviously you'll see repayments go up pretty soon. So you need to do the maths on that. If you're fixed and you're going to renew, then do you renew for a 2-year or a 5-year? What do you do, especially if they're going to peak at the end of this year and then start to drop away, which is what a lot of economists so yeah, it's a bit of a stick or twist moment, isn't it, really? Martin Lewis, and he knows a thing or two about this sort of thing. He says that for every 1% increase in your mortgage interest rate, then add £50 a month on borrowing of £100,000. So obviously, if you're on £200,000, double that to an extra £100 a month. That's if your interest rate goes up by 1%. But we're talking about a quarter of a percent increase in the base rate, which means commercially you're looking at interest rates going up by about 5 or 6%. That is for those lenders that haven't already priced that in already and increased their mortgage rates already, which many have. We've been speaking to people here this lunchtime, finding out how it's going to affect their mortgages. Here's a couple of people who are going to be renewing later this summer, so they've got to make some key decisions. Your rate, when you refix, you're going to fix at a higher rate now, aren't you?
Probably, yeah.
How are you feeling about that?
Not great, yeah. But the news is they're apparently meant to go back down by the end of the year, aren't they? So I don't know if the deals are going to be getting better.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Apparently they think there might be one more rise and then it'll peak and fall. But obviously you don't necessarily want to fix in, do you? Because then you'll be losing out.
We've been offered a fixed deal. I can't remember what it was now, obviously higher. We haven't obviously accepted until we're getting nearer to August.
Yeah. Hopefully, we're hoping it's going to come down in the future, so it won't fix for too long.
Yeah. So what? So you think you'll do a 2-year fix because you think it'll peak end of the year, something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. How much sort of anxiety does that cause you guys, or stress?
A bit, because we've been fixed for 5 years, so our payments are fairly low.
Wow. So you fixed when it was close to 0.1, I'd say.
Something like that. Yeah. It's not too bad right now, but it'll probably get worse when we remortgage.
Right. Okay.
Nursery's expensive and stuff. That's our main concern. Otherwise,
oh yeah, nursery for you.
She's going in September, and we've got a 3-year-old in at the moment.
Oh, okay.
So they won't cross over, but there's no break either.
In a year's time, you're going to have that remortgage and the nursery as well. Yeah. Okay. Would you say, how are you feeling about the future then financially, especially given there's an election coming up as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that have that? I guess that factors into how you might vote.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah, and that was the interesting thing, Mark, wasn't it? The current financial situation for a lot of people, according to that gentleman anyway, going to affect how they vote next year. And so that chap was talking about also having to fork out for nursery costs. And I know that's quite a contentious policy issue at the moment. So when those manifestos are eventually published next spring, a lot of people are going to be reading them and working out, is it actually going to change my life or not? And is that going to affect the way I vote?
Yeah, that key question, do I feel better? And perhaps the political cost that will be expanded as a result of that. Paul, thank you for updating us there at Godalming High Street down in Surrey, of course. And let's reflect that Jeremy Hunt, whose constituency is also in Surrey, the Chancellor, he's reacted to this decision today. This is what he had to say.
To the Bank of England's monetary policy report.
Although it's obviously good news, the bank is not now predicting a recession this year. It's very challenging for families with mortgages to see interest rates go up. But unless we tackle rising prices, the cost of living crisis will just continue. And that's why it is essential we stick to our plan to halve inflation. And if we do that, we can bring certainty back to family finances.
On that target, the bank thinks inflation will be higher for longer. Headline rate is now forecast to still be above 5% at the end of this year. Are you still confident you'll meet your target? on halving inflation? Because goodness, it's looking tight, isn't it?
The Bank of England is predicting that we will hit the inflation target, but there's never been anything automatic about hitting it. That's why it's so important, if we're going to bring certainty back to family finances, stop prices rising, that we stick to our plan to halve it.
So the Chancellor saying that everyone's sticking to their plans, but let's just reflect very quickly that there's another voice indicating criticism. The Institute of Chartered Accountants saying another rate rise will come as a nasty blow, indicating the Monetary Policy Committee needs to be more forward-looking in setting interest rates rather than being overly focused on current inflation, given the long time lag between rate rises and its impact on the broader economy. So another critical voice there. More reaction to come, but first let's get an update on the latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2:33. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. UK interest rates have been raised for a 12th time in a row in a further attempt by the Bank of England to tackle soaring inflation. The bank's base rate has increased by 1/4 percentage point from 4.25 to 4.5%, the highest level in 15 years. Economists say it'll put further pressure on already struggling mortgage holders and businesses in debt. But the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, says the outlook for growth and unemployment has improved.
6 months ago, we were expecting a shallow but long recession. Since then, energy prices have fallen substantially, and economic activity is holding up better than expected. So today we are forecasting modest but positive growth and a much smaller increase in unemployment. We think inflation will fall quite sharply over the coming months, beginning with the April number, which will be released in 2 weeks' time.
The UK has confirmed it's supplying Ukraine with the long-range missiles it requested for its fight against Russia. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has told MPs the donation of Storm Shadow missiles gives Ukraine the best chance to defend themselves. The decision follows Kyiv's repeated pleas for weapons, more weapons from the West. And Pakistan's Supreme Court has ordered for the release of former Prime Minister Imran Khan and says his arrest was illegal. Mr. Khan was arrested on Tuesday by paramilitary officers in riot gear from a courtroom. His arrest sparked widespread protests across the country, with more than 1,000 arrested, forcing the government to call in the army to help restore order. TV online, DAB Plus radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Mark, we'll be back in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, making his first public appearance since a civil jury in New York found him guilty of sexual assault and defaming E. Jean Carroll, Donald Trump again denied even knowing her, describing her then as, quote, a whack job. And amongst other things, the former president saying that if he were to be re-elected, he would be inclined, as he said, to pardon a large portion of those who'd been prosecuted for their part in the storming of the Capitol back in January 2021. He also claimed he would end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours. Let's speak now to Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics at University College Dublin. Professor Scott, thank you very much for your time. Clearly, he's not going to retreat in any way from his bombastic approach.
When Donald Trump is backed up, he doubles down. He's doubled down for almost 50 years as a businessman, as a presidential candidate, as president, and now trying to return to the White House. And he really presents a choice. And we saw it last night, really in lines that he's repeated again and again, from saying that the 2020 election was rigged, from endorsing the violence in the Capitol attack of January 2021, from the ongoing defamation of E. Jean Carroll. He's really saying, you choose me or you choose the American system. And there is no in between. If you break down everything that Trump said, there's no real comment on the issues. There's no significant comment on women's rights or the economy or foreign policy beyond that fairly silly idea that he would just end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. It simply is Trump saying, I don't like the judiciary, choose me. I don't like certain members of Congress, choose me. I don't like democracy when it votes against me, choose me. Unfortunately, CNN played into his hands last night. It remains to be seen if the rest of the media in the US, in the UK and beyond, keeps playing into the spectacle, the Trump circus, rather than focusing on the issues that actually are more important for Americans on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, but that choose me approach then appears to be working, whether it's calculated or not, and is poll ratings within the Republican Party, I think now a double-digit lead over Ron DeSantis. So, you know, it's reverberating, if you like.
Well, I think you know, Mark, that today's polls can be tomorrow's fish paper, and that is that Hillary Clinton, if I remember, was leading in the polls in front of Donald Trump in 2016 until just before the election. And here, we're not talking about a week until the election. We're talking about almost a year until the first Republican primary. And we're talking about, well, 19 months until a general election. So, no, I think the media, again, gets sucked into the idea of, oh, it's a horse race, and look, this horse is ahead. And, well, we might as well declare it the winner when we're only in the first furlong of what is an 8-furlong course.
Do you think that might be why Ron DeSantis has kept counsel and has not given any kind of public reaction either to the jury's decision in New York or to what Trump was saying last night in New Hampshire?
Ron DeSantis is caught between a rock and a hard place. Again, if you had talked to me a month ago, we would have been talking about Ron DeSantis being ahead of Trump in certain polls. And look, DeSantis is on his way. But he really has stumbled in presenting himself, both within the United States and including internationally, with a visit here last week that didn't go very well. And so Ron DeSantis has an even bigger problem beyond his momentary difficulties, and that is, do I clearly renounce Donald Trump and say that Trump's behavior is unacceptable and risk losing the votes of Trumpists, or do I bend the knee to Trump and risk looking weak? And right now, it doesn't appear DeSantis can choose.
No. Now, you lecture, of course, at University College Dublin. I'm just looking at what Joe Biden's been saying in New York at a Democratic Party event, reflecting on his visit to both Ireland and the Northern Ireland. Speaking to reporters, he said, I got to go back to Ireland for the Irish Accords to make sure they weren't, the Brits, didn't screw around and Northern Ireland didn't walk away from their commitments. Now, I'm just wondering what perhaps the DUP and others make of that, bearing in mind their suspicions, as they said, about his political allegiance to the Republic.
Oh, I mean, the DUP in Northern Ireland and the UK government knew full well not only what Joe Biden thinks, but most American congressmen, Republican or Democrat, because since 2019, it had clearly been stated by Republican congressmen, by the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, as well as by Biden, if you put the Brexit agreement in jeopardy by scrapping the Northern Ireland Protocol, you will not get a US-UK trade agreement. We will not choose you, London, over Irish security. And Rishi Sunak knew that. It didn't mean that Joe Biden exerted a veto over Rishi Sunak, but in the end of the day, the Windsor Framework was to avert a crisis not only with the European Union and not only with the US, it was to avert a crisis over the future of Ireland. And Joe Biden just happened to play a part, but not the leading part in that drama.
OK, Scott, thank you very much indeed. Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics at University College Dublin, updating us there with reaction to the what was called a town hall meeting in New Hampshire last night for Donald Trump. Quite a town hall. Let's reflect that we've been discussing throughout the programme today Defence Secretary Ben Wallace confirming that the UK will provide Ukraine with multiple Storm Shadow cruise missiles ahead of the, anticipated spring counter-offensive against Russia. Let's get the Ukrainian perspective now. We're joined by Ukrainian Member of Parliament Kira Rudik once more. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Ben Wallace saying this was in direct reaction to what Russia had been doing. And, of course, we heard President Zelensky just the other day asking for yet more help before launching this counteroffensive.
Hello, Mark. Thank you so much for having me. Indeed, we are all thrilled here in Ukraine by this news. We are thrilled because we know that this is a significant step forward for us in the path to the victory, in liberating all our territories and freeing our people. We have been saying that we need long-range weapons and missiles for a while right now. Why do we need them? Because Russia uses temporary occupied territories as a platform for the further attacks on us. And we need to be able to destroy their supplies, to destroy their ammunition and weapons, and be able to move forward. I would not over-exaggerate if say that a long-range weapons is a critical point for the counteroffense. It's a yes or no for counteroffense. And this is why it is so important that once again, Britain is taking a lead on saying yes to Ukraine, saying yes to our asks and realizing how crucial that would be in the success of the such a long-awaiting operation of liberating our country.
Yeah, we understand these cruise missiles have got a range of about 155 miles. We're just seeing pictures at the moment of the shorter range missiles and rockets and so on. But clearly the worry then, and I understand the Ukrainian government's had to give an undertaking that they will not be launched on Russian territory proper, that it will just be perhaps Crimea and eastern Ukraine.
Correct. We are a sovereign country. We do not intend to operate on enemy's territory. We just want to liberate our territories and make sure that our country is sovereign again. That's it. And Ukrainian government has been very clear about that. And again, we can just confirm that these are our intentions. This is how we are going to do. However, we critically need those weapons because without them, we have much less chances in succeeding. And there is one more thing, and I'm sure you would love it, Mark. Just a couple of hours ago, I had a meeting with people from here from Ukraine, and they were saying, is this an exchange for the Eurovision?
Oh, I see. Right. OK, so you're getting your prize, perhaps, even if you don't win Eurovision in Liverpool. Well, let's actually talk about that. I mean, we understand, I think I'm right in saying that the Ukrainian band, is it Go-A, who had been previously sort of performing, saying that Liverpool is almost like home, plenty of Ukrainian installations and everything painted in Ukrainian colours, blue and yellow.
I think that, well, people in Liverpool have done an amazing job so that everybody who visits understands that it's a Ukrainian party hosted by Liverpool, showing an incredible warmth and support and solidarity, knowing how painful it is for us that we cannot host Eurovision this year ourselves, but knowing that this is another opportunity for all of us to have a chance to show how united we are. How we are standing for the same ways, for the same values, and for the same good things. So I want to use this opportunity to say once again, thank you so much, people of Britain, for everything that you do for our country, for our people, including the Eurovision.
OK, there was a bit of reaction when President Zelensky said that he would like maybe to have had it hosted in a country next to Ukraine, so maybe more Ukrainians could have actually joined in that. But perhaps he was indicating that, he wanted it closer to home.
Well, I think we should go with the rules, and the fact that it is UK is hosting, it's according to the rules of Eurovision, and I'm sure that what is important here is the spirit, and the spirit is definitely there, and is definitely to support Ukraine, to show how we matter, and to make sure that the good word and this intention is spread. And I think it is a very successful way of achieving it.
OK, Kira, thank you very much for your time once more, and we'll be back live to Liverpool shortly to update people on everything that's happening there. Thank you very much indeed. Well, indeed, as we've just been reflecting during an interview this morning, President Zelensky expressing his disappointment that Kyiv, or a neighbouring country to Ukraine, had not been able to host this year's event. But, of course, the European Broadcasting Union inviting the UK to host because it was UK's contestant Sam Ryder, who's the runner-up in last year's contest behind the Ukrainian Kalush Orchestra. But the atmosphere is continuing to build in Liverpool. Let's actually cross there once more and join our reporter Sophie Reaper. And as we're hearing there from Ukraine itself, of course, they're taking great comfort from the fact that Liverpool is stepped into the breach.
Absolutely, Mark. Everyone I seem to have spoken to, whether they're originally from the UK or whether they're from, further afield, they all seem to agree that Liverpool is doing really quite a phenomenal job representing on behalf of Ukraine. Now, the dress rehearsal for semi-final number 2 is well underway. In fact, we can hear it here outside the M&S Bank Arena. That semi-final number 2 will be taking place this evening, and then on to the grand final on Saturday. Countries from all over Europe hoping that they can do well. The atmosphere, as you say, really is starting to build here in Liverpool. Now, this isn't, of course, the UK's first rodeo, for lack of a better phrase, when it comes to Eurovision. It's the 9th time we've held the contest here in the UK. And in fact, it's the 5th time we've held it when another country has either been unable to or has elected not to do so. The last time that we held it wasn't since 1998, I believe, after Katrina and the Waves won it the previous year. But yeah, absolutely, the atmosphere here in Liverpool is incredible. Here's what some people had to say to me a little bit earlier on.
We always have a good time with Eurovision every single year. It's always a good laugh, it's a good party. There's always like really good camp vibes, and it's just one big party, and that's what we love about Eurovision. I've been doing it for a long time.
Who are you cheering for this year?
Oh, I don't even know the roster at all. I go into it purely blind on the day.
Norway.
You'll say Norway, aren't you?
I mean, still support the UK, but I think Norway will probably be favourites.
Yeah, I mean,
it's one big party really, and the fact that so many different people from different countries are coming over, and it's just, yeah, we're excited that it's in the UK this time. It never ever happens.
Definitely excited for the first time in my life it's been in England.
Yeah.
It's absolutely amazing. We're going to get to be at an event for it,
Yeah,
so really excited for everything.
Well, I'm supporting Iceland because I'm doing a master's degree there, and then the UK because we're from the UK, and Australia because we've got a family from Australia.
Romania
because friends from Romania.
Tapestry of countries you're supporting then. What does it mean to have it in, I know you're originally from the UK, what does it mean to have it in the UK this year?
I think it's great to show the diversity of.
Well, as we were just hearing there, support has been flooding in from all over Europe, not just people here supporting the United Kingdom. And whether people have been the lucky few who've managed to get tickets for either the semi-finals, the dress rehearsals, or of course the big grand final, or whether in fact they were unable to get tickets, people are just coming into Liverpool in order to try and soak up some of that electric Eurovision atmosphere.
Yeah, and of course a bit of a musical legacy, and I'm not talking Haircut 100. Of course they've got Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane, the Cavern all to visit as well.
Absolutely. The Beatles, of course, being the most famous act probably from Liverpool, but the musical heritage is wide. You know, Cilla Black, Joy Division, the list goes on and on. It really is a hub for music, not only in the Northwest, but also in the UK. So I think that's really been reflected in how Liverpool are hosting this year's Eurovision.
Sophie, thank you very much indeed, and let's not forget the swinging blue jeans and Jerry and the Pacemakers too. Anyway, let's just update you that we're being told Ruslana, who was the first Ukrainian winner of the competition in 2004, will be joining Katrina, who we heard about there, in a concert outside the Eurovision Village in Liverpool tomorrow night before the city hosts the Song Contest final. That's just coming in. More on that with Patrick, and of course all the other stories of the day coming up. Stay with us here on GB News.
Hello, it's time for your GB News forecast with me, Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. There are certainly quite a lot of heavy showers out there this afternoon, even some thunderstorms. They will ease later, but for the next few hours we've got low pressure sitting right over the UK. It's a relatively slack area of low pressure. That means the winds are light, and that means where the showers are occurring, they're slow moving. Not everyone is seeing these showers, but certainly across some central and eastern parts of England, that's where the most lively downpours are expected over the next few hours, and thundery rain as well. But eventually overnight they ease away. Most places end up drier, but there will be a lot of low cloud creeping in from the North Sea, some drizzle on the North Sea coast as well as over the hills in the east, and temperatures dipping to the mid to high single figures in many places. Clearest spells out towards the west, although there'll be a few fog patches for Northern Ireland first thing. Then the sunshine helps to break up the cloud from the west towards the east. And for Scotland, Northern Ireland, northern and western England as well as Wales, sunny spells break out. A few showers for Wales and the southwest, and some more persistent drizzly rain for East Anglia in the southeast. That, carried by a North Sea wind, will make it feel cold. 12 degrees on the North Sea coast, but 18 or 19 for some of the sunnier western spots. Into Friday night, we're going to see the thicker cloud return across much of central and eastern England, parts of eastern Scotland as well, and some mistiness and drizzle around the North Sea coast. But elsewhere across the UK, clear spells, one or two mist and fog patches, and temperatures for Scotland and Northern Ireland dipping in some places into the low single figures. So a chilly start for Scotland, Northern Ireland, North West England first thing Saturday, but actually that's where the sunniest skies will be. Still some mistiness around coasts, particularly the North Sea coast, and still a lot of low cloud across central areas. That will tend to ebb back towards the North Sea through the day on Saturday. Sunny spells breaking out widely and feeling warm in that sunshine.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is